Political Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Y'all Mean of Revolution, and we got a World War III alert. Be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe. This is very serious. We knew Benjamin Netanyahu would do this after he went to come to America to let the puppets know what he wanted them to do for him. Salute, family, peace, and blessings. I had a whole nother live plan. We planned on digging a little deep into Kamala, but I had to shelve that because of this. Is it a false flag? Who done it? But let's look into it. What exactly happened? 10 people dead, plenty of women and kids. Hezbollah is saying it was Israel. Israel is saying it was Hezbollah. But let's dig into this.
And we can speak to John live in Jerusalem now. John, let me start with focusing on this attack that we are hearing about from Lebanon to a town in the Golan Heights of Majd al-Shams, a rocket attack. We're hearing that 10 people have died. What more do we know?
Yeah, it sounds very nasty indeed. Israeli medical services reporting that there are a number of casualties between the ages of 10 and 20 years old. They're reporting that 9 people have died, perhaps as many as 11 casualties. Details just coming through at the moment. Some sort of projectile, a large projectile, hit a football pitch and a playground area in a community called Majd al-Shams. It's a community of about 11,000 people in the north of the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights is disputed territory that's been held by the Israelis, effectively annexed by them in the early 1990s.
Not held, seized, taken. Just like they say, Russia don't need to seize Ukrainian territory. Israel seized some Assyrian territory. They try to make it look nice. And if it's occupied, that means, just remember, when Zelensky is striking occupied territory that Russia has seized, they say, hey, that's Russia, that's Zelensky's territory. They don't care about the kids that's killed on the beach. They don't care. They say there's no innocent civilians there. Well, this is Syrian land right here that they're on. This is Syrian land. But what makes this more stranger is it wasn't Israelis I'm hearing that died. It was actually Arab Druids who are collaborators with the Israelis.
1980s. So who's responsible? Well, the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, they have come forward. They say they have done an assessment. They have intelligence. They say the evidence is clear that Hezbollah is responsible for this.
Not true.
This is the Iran-backed organization backed in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah's media representative, very quick to come out this evening, he said that Hezbollah had absolutely nothing to do with this.
Now, Hezbollah has been striking military positions all throughout Israel, striking military positions, attacking their army. Only Israel has been attacking civilians. Hezbollah has not attacked any Israeli civilians. That's all make-believe. But now we have what looked like a false flag to drag America in the war. Or a soccer field was targeted by Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah has said, yes, we've been killing Israeli soldiers every day, all day, but they haven't killed no kids. So they came out and said, that's not us. That's not true.
Incident. But what we do know, multiple rockets were fired from Lebanon into Israel. We know that the sirens went off, and we know that Israel's air defense system, its Iron Dome shield, it did not intercept these projectiles, the projectile or projectiles. I can tell you that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, he has been informed. He will have an emergency meeting, we understand, this evening. And I think that we can expect a significant response against Hezbollah from the Israelis in the coming days.
Well, now, they could try that if they want to, but Hezbollah does not really want them. Any significant response going to be met with a significant response, you see. But that's what Israel want. Israel want this. They need help, and the only way to get help is for the U.S. to get into it. And the only way the U.S. can get into it is if Hezbollah start really kicking their butt, which they will if Israel try to go berserk after blaming Hezbollah for killing these kids.
It wasn't a military target. It was a football pitch with a playground attached, where a group of teenagers were having fun, the victims between the ages of 10 and 20 years old. Their home, Majd al-Shams, is located in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, the majority Arabic-speaking from the Druze faith. But it will be seen as an...
Now, that's very, very important. That's a point they're going to try to lose in the conversation. Don't let them lose you. Some Arabs was killed in this village today. Now, Arab collaborators, salute Quinn, collaborating with Israel. They're not standing up for no business. You know, they're like shoe shiners, Arab shoe shiners. That's who. So Israel allegedly has attacked its own citizens, but they're still going to say, well, Israel was attacked. This is us. We've been attacked. You see, that's what makes it look more suspicious, because 10, 11, 12 Israelis, Jewish people did not die. That did not happen.
An attack on the state of Israel. A military spokesman blaming Hezbollah.
This evening, the Hezbollah terrorist organization in Lebanon fired a rocket at children playing soccer in a soccer field in Majd al-Shams in northern Israel. Hezbollah then lied to the whole world and claimed they did not carry out this attack. This is a lie.
The evidence is clear, say the Israelis. And Hezbollah's response, we had nothing to do with it. Questions will be asked. The youngsters didn't have time to find cover. Israel's air defenses failing to intercept the weapon. But the country's prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, will demand a response. He's seen here with a military advisor.
You see this? You see this? Everybody was just saying this. The man just left the U.S. demanding that they help him fight Iran and Hezbollah. Then he get back to Israel, and all of a sudden the kids is slaughtered on the soccer field. Hezbollah done it. But when we've been paying attention to this war, is one thing about Hezbollah, they have been attacking pinpoint precision strikes on the military. Israel can't whine about that. No one cares about their military. So they, oh man, we got to get the hearts. We got to get some sympathy. Kids playing soccer, just enjoying their day. We're hit with a rocket. Yeah. Now the World War, the non-Western world want to know who fired that rocket, because Hezbollah don't got a lie. They say we didn't do it. Well, who did it then?
After the attack. It was a wretched day across the region. This girls' school in Gaza struck by the Israelis some 12 hours before.
Now, this is what they really should be talking about. But all these kids, that was this girls' school where the kids was slaughtered. Now, they just talk about why the kids was playing. These kids just in this building, mind their own business, hiding out. And they was slaughtered by the Israelis.
Our team saw a blur of bodies extracted from the classrooms. And the look of terror on a young girl's face. We were struck, she utters. Khadija School was full of displaced people, and they used some classrooms here to treat the sick. It was also an Israeli target. The premises playing host to a Hamas command and control center, says the IDF.
See
and their missiles.
See how they get away with destroying every school, every church, every synagogue, every building, saying it's a command and control center, which is outrageous. It's BS. The whole world knows it's nonsense. Kill these children and say Hamas is using this to wage war on us.
Missiles punctured concrete floors. The walls blown into the neighborhood. Gaza's health ministry says dozens of people were killed, including a significant number of children. More than 100 have been injured. Others have been left under the concrete.
No, the world don't care about that. Shalom, Queen. It's going to be World War III behind the false flag attack that just took place. Now, Israel slaughtered these children said Hamas is hiding out somewhere. And so that's another thing I want y'all never think. Every time, because I've seen some people stupid. Who is these men right here? They done told you it's over 2.3 million Palestinians. It was only 30,000 Hamas fighters. Everybody is not Hamas. Everybody don't want to fight. Some people just want to be regular men in society. You see, some people just want to stay around and survive. They don't want to fight. See, these are the people. They're not Hamas. Hamas is on the ground. You see, but if they can make y'all think, well, we struck the school because one of these dudes was hanging with Hamas one day. That type of nonsense.
People say there were thousands living here, some sort of refuge from this brutal war.
Why were these people targeted? What are they guilty of? I go downstairs, I find a head, a leg, and an arm. I can't comprehend what's happening.
Were there displaced people here, he's asked?
People don't know where to go. Where are people supposed to go?
In all too familiar scenes, the casualties were taken to a nearby hospital. Children covered in blood, adults grimacing in pain, where they waited on the floor for treatment.
Ain't no pain pills.
The health ministry said 12 people had been killed in other strikes around the strip.
But you see, but they don't want to talk to y'all about that. What they want to talk to y'all about is this goddamn false flag that Israel is vowing revenge for the Arabs that was killed in occupied territory, Israel. No Israelis was killed, but they don't care, you know.
Being killed and many others injured in a rocket attack that hit a town in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Many of the casualties were children who were playing on a football pitch in the town of Majal Shams. Israel has blamed Lebanon's Hezbollah movement. It has denied responsibility. Mark Lowen sent us this report.
Why would Hezbollah waste their
Early evening in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, and the warning of an incoming threat about to become deadly and dangerous. A rocket struck a football field where children and teenagers were playing. Several were killed in the deadliest strike since the cross-border fire between Lebanon and Israel began last October. The anguish of loved ones at young lives cut short in a conflict that could be about.
These are Arabs. These are not Israeli Jews. These are Arabs who live on occupied territory. This land, this is Syrian land. This is the Golan Heights, plenty of oil and stuff. Israel seized it. This is occupied territory. Under the UN Charter, Syria still got the right to fight to get this land back. So Syria has every right to shoot rockets into this place if it wants to. Just like they're saying Zelensky can attack Crimea and the territory that Russia has seized because it was once. This is Syrian land. But anyway, so I'm trying to let you know, no Israeli Jewish people were killed in what some people are saying is a false flag. We'll get to that. But Israel is saying we're going to have World War III because Hezbollah attacked these civilians. Hezbollah has been attacking Israel military every day and bragging about it, showing us videos. Hezbollah came out and says a damn lie that they attacked any civilians.
About to escalate sharply. A rocket barrage today, which lit up the sky, was claimed by the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, but it denies firing the deadly strike onto the football field. That, the Israeli army spokesman says, is a lie.
This attack shows the true face of Hezbollah, a terrorist organization that targets and murders children playing soccer on a Saturday evening.
Now, why they just targeted a girls' school and killed children? They said Hezbollah showed you who they really is, killing them kids, which Hezbollah say, y'all know y'all did that. But right on the other side of town, they're slaughtering in Gaza, and they just showed you a children's school was hit. Kids in there, and people in there hiding. And they said they were looking for Hezbollah. So Hezbollah is hiding. This is all lies. And it's a false flag what happened in the occupied territory. But that don't matter because they're going to use that. The U.S. Congress not going to say it. They're going to say Hezbollah slaughtered And they're going to keep saying they slaughtered Israeli citizens. They're not going to tell you and say there was Arabs. They're going to say Israeli citizens. They want people to think Jews were killed.
We will act to restore full security on our northern border for all the citizens of the state of Israel.
And the question is how Israel's government will react. Benjamin Netanyahu is returning early from the US to chair his security cabinet, where he'll face calls to hit back hard. As the young injured were rushed to hospital, fear is growing that all-out war with Hezbollah, a proxy of Iran, could now be drawing closer. South, in Gaza, the other front of this war, Palestinians too were scrambling to save lives, this time after Israeli strikes killed dozens. Here too, it's children paying the price in a nightmare with no end. The missiles tore into a school housing displaced Gazans. Israel says it targeted a Hamas command and control center inside. But from the rubble came those simply seeking shelter. Mustafa says the blast threw him into the air and he fell to the ground. I didn't know where to run for fear, he says, so I fled inside the school thinking it was safe. But then I saw heads, hands and feet. The spark from the 7th of October ignited Gaza and now Golan. The question tonight is, will it start an inferno? Mark Lowen, BBC News, Jerusalem.
See, Israel need help. They can't defeat Hamas. All they can do is what you see. They're slaughtering kids. They can't defeat no soldiers. If they think they're going to go berserk on Hezbollah, they got another thing coming.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show.
Wait, no. That's not the one I want to play.
Israel just carried out the biggest false flag attack to justify an all-out war on Lebanon. We had reports from Israel saying that a large heavy missile from Hezbollah landed on a place called Majd al-Shams in the occupied Golan Heights. Hezbollah denied the attack, and Hezbollah do not usually attack this area particularly because it has a majority of a Druze population, most of whom do not have an Israeli citizenship and do not recognize the legitimacy of Israel and are not drafted in the Israeli army, unlike many of the other Druze population inside of Israel. Hezbollah is denying, Israel is outright blaming them. The majority of the people who are killed are reportedly children. It was on a football pitch where children were training. They were having a football exercise. All of the details that we've seen so far show that this is a false flag attack from Israel. Hezbollah never carried out an attack over there. The population, most of them are not Israeli. They don't have an Israeli identity or nationality. And it's the easiest place to carry out a massacre without Israeli casualties to justify an all-out war on Lebanon. I will be talking more in depth about this in my live stream tonight. If you want to participate, join me later this evening. I will post a link on my community tab, and I will.
So this is this latest episode is looking like they did it themselves, but that really don't matter because it's World War III we facing because they can't defeat Hezbollah. Once Hezbollah get to overrunning their cities and smashing their military sites, the U.S. will have no choice but to get in that fight. And once the U.S. try to get in that fight to fight Hezbollah, Iran will have no choice but to get in that fight.
With Netanyahu's visit to the United States, if you were to mention the main objectives of this visit, what could you draw for us?
Two things. One is to assert some sort of legitimacy for Benjamin Netanyahu as as a world leader. I just want to remind the audience that he is somebody who has an arrest warrant out for him because he is a war criminal, a practitioner of genocide. This is a man who is responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of innocent Palestinian people. He is the scum of the earth. And yet he was invited to the United States to speak in the people's house before the people's representatives. He wrapped himself in not just the flag of the United States, but the ostensible cloak of legitimacy that entails, that brings out. So this was to, assert him as a legitimate leader. And then the other main goal is to, in doing so, send a signal to the Israeli people that he is the anointed leader of Israel, that America supports, America backs. There were some peripheral things being discussed. He, of course, has a vision that he outlined in his speech. It was pure fantasy, derived from lies, derived from mischaracterizations, and just total manufactured crap. But he had to say that because he had to put a marker down for his constituents back in Israel, the far right wing, that he was fighting for the cause they support. He couldn't come to the United States and articulate something that was not politically supportable by his base. So that any deviation from what he articulated, and there will be major deviations, when he returns to Israel, he can say, I had no choice because America insisted on this. And we need America, and America has picked me to be the leader of Israel during these difficult times, because his coalition will collapse if he, buys into a ceasefire, which he's being pressured to do so by America. So confronting the reality of a collapsed coalition and understanding that without the ability to assemble a new coalition to replace it, his political career is over. And he will probably, at that point in time, spend the rest of his life in jail as a convicted, corrupt leader, unable to leave Israel because he'll be arrested on the spot because he's a war criminal who has committed genocide against the Palestinian people. He is going to do his best to remain politically viable. Right now, the only way he can do that is to wrap himself in the American flag and say, I am the anointed one, the one that the United States, and this ridiculous show in the people's house, having American leaders who have lost all morality, all sense of right and wrong, applaud him as if this was a replay of the Soviet Central Committee of the Communist Party back in the Cold War.
We thought that he's going to ask for some sort of permission to go after Hezbollah, but he was talking more about Iran, and he wants a war with Iran. Do you think he's really serious in what he's talking about?
No, of course not. He's not serious. He can't have a war with Hezbollah because he will lose a war with Hezbollah, and he can't have a war with Iran because he will lose a war with Iran. It's not serious. Nobody in the United States is taking this serious. Yes, we have the French kooks on the right and the French kooks on the left, both of whom meet in the same spot because they are unabashed supporters of this Zionist criminal entity we call Israel. But nobody's going to war with Hezbollah or Iran. That's the way to a death sentence for Israel there is. He was playing to the base. There will be no war with Iran. There will be no war with Hezbollah. It just isn't going to happen. It's a fantasy on his part. The Israeli Defense Force has said, we can't do this. We are out of tanks. We are out of spare parts. We are out of ammunition. We can't defeat Hezbollah. We can't defeat Hamas. So when you have your military saying this, what makes you think that he's going to go forward with campaigns that are destined to end in not just the a minor defeat of Israel, but the strategic defeat of Israel, the physical destruction of Israel? No, it's just all words for the base.
Don't you think that is a desperate attempt on his part? Because after a military operation that wasn't successful in Gaza, and they're shifting to Hezbollah right now, it's the Biden administration said to them that if you go after Hezbollah, we're not going to be there to help you.
They good
You
deal
have
on
to
that.
do it by yourself. And right now they're shifting to Iran. It seems that they're hoping that if they pick a bigger fight with Iran, that could bring the United States into the conflict.
No, it's stupid. The United States has already told him, we're not playing this game. Don't you remember April? When Iran attacked Israel in retaliation for the Israel criminal action that took place in Damascus, where they violated international law by bombing a diplomatically protected facility of the Iranian on Syrian soil. What was the response? A massive attack by Iran against Israel, 9 missiles of which penetrated the impenetrable defense shield, hitting the targets they were designated to hit in Israeli air bases, sending a signal that we can do this anytime we want to. Israel said we have to respond. What did America say? Good luck, because you ain't getting our help. You want to know why America said that? Because back when President Trump assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the Iranians retaliated against the American forces at the Al-Assad air base in Iraq, firing missiles that penetrated the American defense shield and hit their targets with a precision that shocked America. Mr. Donald Trump, the toughest guy in the world, the tough guy doesn't back down, sat in silence because there's nothing he could say, because Iran put a marker on the table that said, if you want to take this to the next step, every single one of your facilities in the Middle East will be hit with the same level of lethal precision. So Trump just shut up. And that lesson carried over to the Biden administration. They know what the outcome would be of a conflict with Iran. So they're not going to back Israel's insane desire. This is Benjamin Netanyahu. Look, there's a reason why he's a war criminal. It's because he's insane. He's been insane from day one. This is a man who's so far detached from reality, it's not even funny. He's also a political operative that's shown a proclivity for surviving in scenarios where most politicians would not. He's playing a very dangerous political game. But the United States has made it as crystal clear as possible. They're not going to be sucked into a conflict with Iran. There's zero chance of that happening. Zero chance. Let me remind everybody.
Revolutionary salute to our brother Ricardo for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Appreciate the love, family. Salute.
We thought we could intimidate the Houthi, that we could compel them through force of arms in stopping their blockade against Israel. We failed. We continue to fail. And that military that failed against the Houthi is supposed to somehow defeat Iran? Go smoke more dope. It isn't going to happen.
At the same time, Scott, when we are witnessing that Putin is bringing Erdogan and Bashar al-Assad together, China is bringing all these groups in Palestine together to make some sort of agreement among them. And you see Netanyahu just talking about war in the US Congress. How do you picture this Russia and China trying to bring some sort of agreement, and the United States, everybody's applauding Netanyahu for bringing more wars?
Well, I mean, basically, we see the stark contrast between the American approach towards global affairs and the approach by the Russians, the Chinese, and others. Dwight D. Eisenhower set the stage for this in his farewell address, where he warned the American people back in 1961 about the dangers of the military-industrial complex. He said, if we allow our society to continue to be dominated by this, it will forever change and destroy American democracy. And that's where we are today, because this facade of democracy we call the United States of America is little more than a war machine. Our economy, our society, our politics, the way we interface with the world is all defined by conflict, because that's what a military-industrial complex demands. War is the lifeblood of the American system. We can't succeed, we can't function unless they have conflict. We need conflict, so we promote conflict. That's why you see what you see here. Russia and China, on the other hand, aren't addicted to their respective military industrial complexes. They haven't been injecting that heroin into their veins. They believe in diplomacy. They believe in nonviolent resolutions to complex problems. And they've shown that it succeeds. After all, it was the Russians and the Chinese that brought the Saudis and the Iranians together. It's the Russians and the Chinese that have brought the various Palestinian factions together to create a fusion system that cannot be rejected by Israel or the United States on the grounds that it is Hamas dominated. And now you have Putin doing his best to bring an end to a conflict in Syria that was created by the United States. The United States created this. The United States made the Syrian conflict happen. The United States poured billions into that because we are a war machine addicted to war. That's all we know how to do. We do not know how to make peace. Peace is actually poison to us because if there's peace, the war machine isn't being fed. But the Russians and the Chinese don't operate that way. But here's the difference. The Russians and Chinese don't care about America anymore. They simply don't care. I mean, America's there, can't ignore it. But the day where they had to say, well, we can't do this because America opposes it is over. They don't care. Not only that, by promoting peace, they're going to watch America, this addict to war, go into withdrawals because without the conflict to feed it. I mean, look again, look at Netanyahu. What passed for a peace plan under Donald Trump in the Middle East? The Abrams Accords. The Abrams Accords is a big peace plan. No, it was a war. It literally was a system designed to promote conflict between Sunni and Shia, with Israel siding on the side of the Sunni. That's all it was. The Abrams Accord was not a peace plan. It was designed to suppress the national ambitions of the Palestinians while creating a political, economic alliance to oppose the Shia Crescent, the axis of resistance. When I say oppose, I mean oppose violently, to create an economic system that would buy more American weapons. That's what it was all about. And it's dead. It's gone. It's finished. And so what's Netanyahu's response? More Abrams, double down on Abrams. But the region, the world, China, Russia, they're not playing that game because they recognize peace is the only path forward. Peace is the only path forward. If you choose war, all you get is death and destruction. For America, that's what we feed on. We feed on the death and destruction of others. We promote the wars abroad. That's all we do. Think about it. Around the world, show me one place where America's promoting peace. One. It's just a challenge out there. Where? What? It doesn't exist. We don't know how to do it because we are addicted to war. And so the Russians and the Chinese are simply pushing us off to the side, and they're promoting peace. And nations are deciding that they don't want the war, the death, the destruction that the United States offers, because that's all America offers. They want peace. They want prosperity. This is the victory of diplomacy over militarism. In America, the only way we're going to save ourselves is to buy into the same thing. Now, this is going to require a radical transformation that we're not ready to undertake. Maybe we need to have some sort of collapse where the edifice of conflict just totally breaks down, and then we can rebound and rebuild as part of a global system. But as long as we think we are the essential nation, the world can't live without us. We're America, but what we mean is that we can't live without the world being at war. That's what it's about. That's what American hegemony is about. One nation surrounded by global conflict, and that conflict feeds us, sustains us, defines us. I think the world's tired of that, and they're walking away.
When Netanyahu is talking about we, Israel and the United States, together with our Arab friends, we can fight Iran. Do you think he considers that if he goes after Iran, if he pick a fight with Iran, that Saudi Arabia and UAE going to be on his part?
Let me correct your question. You mean when the genocidal war criminal at the head of the apartheid, illegitimate Zionist state of Israel? Let's stop talking about Netanyahu as he's somehow legitimate. The man is an insane war criminal. He's the scum of the earth. And like any criminal in a desperate situation, he plots more crimes. He's looking for collaborators in his criminal activity. No one will align with Israel. That's what Israel is starting to learn as a nation. They are fundamentally isolated because the entire world sees them for what they are. An illegitimate Zionistic apartheid state committing criminal acts of genocide against the Palestinian people. So let's stop saying Netanyahu. I spit when I say his name. He's the scum of the earth. He should never have been allowed into my country, into my house, the people's house, the Congress of the United States. He should never received applause from a single representative of the American people, because we are not supposed to be a nation that promotes genocide. And yet that's what we have become, apologists for genocide. Not just cheerleaders for genocide. Screw Benjamin Netanyahu. Nothing he says is linked to reality. Nothing. He can hope, he can want. It's not going to happen. As I told you, that speech was intended to mollify the base back in Israel. There's no real plan there. Saudi Arabia isn't going to jump. Saudi Arabia has bought into BRICS. Okay? That is the future of Saudi Arabia. BRICS, peaceful coexistence, economic expansion, not buying into the war and conflict-driven relationships of the past, but a new future. The same with the United Arab Emirates. That's their future. They're not going to go backwards, and definitely not for a scum like Netanyahu. They're not going to align themselves with a genocidal state. That's insane. Saudi Arabia will never back genocide against the Palestinian people. And that's what Netanyahu is saying he wants. The United Arab Emirates will never back genocide against the Palestinian people. But that's the fantasy world that Netanyahu lives in. This criminal, this scum, this genocidal maniac.
Yeah. How did you find the Kamala Harris policy in not going to the US Congress and later on meeting with Netanyahu?
How did you find it? Because you just described sort of a self-contradictory thing. That explains Kamala Harris. She is nothing. We're watching a movie. I just hope everybody understands that. We're not watching some spontaneous, political revival by this underdog, this wonderful human being who is going to redefine American politics. She's a failed politician. You do know that she ran for president in 2020 and got kicked out of the Democratic primary early because she sucks. She's a horrible human being. Tulsi Gabbard showed that to the entire world during the debate. She calls herself a prosecutor, but she's a prosecutor who kept people in jail when they didn't deserve to be in jail. She used it for her own economic advantage and political advantage in California. She belongs in jail. She's somebody that the American people don't support, never have, never will. She is the literal definition of a DEI hire. Because Joe Biden in 2020 said, I'm going to appoint a black woman as my vice president. My God, what about appointing the best possible person to be your vice president? Now, there might be a black woman out there who is the best possible person. But when you start off by saying, I'm going to appoint a black woman, and then you pick Kamala Harris, who got booted from the Democratic primary because she sucks as a candidate, she sucks as a human being, that is a DEI hire.
Salute, family.
And then look at her vice president. She's accomplished nothing. Nothing. Any successes Biden might be able to say he's done were done because of Biden, because of the establishment, not because of Kamala Harris. She contributed nothing to the cause. Now, he said, I'm going to be a one-term president. I'm here to save American democracy. Now, I'm going to pass the baton off to the next generation. And the next generation, of course, is Kamala Harris, his DEI hire. Except he decided he's not going to be a one-term president. I'm going to stay the course. Got to save democracy. Now, I'm saying it a lot more forcefully than he would. He would go, I'm making fun of a brain-dead, senile old man. I shouldn't do that. But that's the reality. The American president is cognitively not with us in this earth. He went through a primary where he was the candidate. 15 million Americans voted for him to be the candidate. Kamala Harris was not on the ballot. Go back. How many times did he mention Kamala Harris while he was running? Where was she? Was she there campaigning with him? Was it Biden Harris? No, she was the hell away because she sucks. She's horrible. And then he comes in and he says, I will not resign under any circumstances unless God whispers in my ear or there's a medical condition. We don't know why he backed off. They're not being transparent. This was a coup d'etat. They went in and there was a coup where he was pressured into resigning. And Kamala Harris now has been promoted to the candidate and nobody voted for her. She's selected, not elected. The living manifestation of a DEI hire. So we're going through this little honeymoon period. It's all a script. It's a movie script, scripted by the same people, by the way, who gave us the 2020 election. Oh, Scott, you're going into conspiracy. I don't know, read Time Magazine. Read Time Magazine and see how all these non-democratic elements, all these social media players, all these unelected officials brag about how they used extra constitutional means to guarantee Joe Biden's victory. Is that the way America's supposed to operate, with a shadow element out there putting their thumb on the scale extra constitutionally? Some people would say in certain circumstances unconstitutionally, because they doctored state laws, took advantage of the pandemic to promote, mail-in ballots when the system wasn't ready for it. I'm telling you right now, this was a stolen election, 100% stolen by an elite that couldn't win if the normal rules were applied. That's the truth. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about it. That same elite right now is seeking to do a similar manipulation of the American democratic process by having Kamala Harris put into a position that she could not have gotten to had she gone through the normal processes. She would have lost a primary this year had she been the candidate. The Democrats would have run away from her so fast. They would have dumped her so fast. So the system instead played games, and now she's there. She's there. This is all theater. Everything that's being done is for theater. Unfortunately for the Democrats, it's only July, and this movie ain't going to run successfully, at least, until November. At some point in time, the real Kamala Harris will emerge, and she'll be recognized for what she is, a DEI hire, unqualified for the job. Maybe there's a black woman out there. I know there's a black woman out there that could be president of the United States. I know there is, and the Democrats should be seeking her out if they want a black woman. But they have to take that black woman and put her before the American people and make her earn their vote, make her earn their trust. Kamala's earned nothing. The literal definition of a DEI hire.
When you look at Netanyahu suggesting that these people who are protesting outside the building are paid by Iran to do that, don't you think that he's trying to buy the American policymakers into a rhetoric that is not anywhere near the truth?
I mean, there's no doubt he's trying to get the United States to double down on its anti-Iranian policies. That's not really the issue here, though. The issue is that a foreign leader, a war criminal, a genocidal maniac, was speaking at the People's House and daring to criticize American citizens for exercising their constitutional right of free speech, freedom of assembly. Their duty and responsibility as citizens to gather and protest when they feel something needs to be protested. And if you're not gathering to protest a genocidal maniac speaking in the People's House, then you're not much of an American, are you? And the people that were in the Congress applauding this madman, this maniac, this genocidal murderer, sat there and let him criticize Americans for doing what they believe was their constitutional duties. I mean, that's what's really at here. I don't care about Iran. I mean, I do care about Iran, but what I mean, who cares what Benjamin Netanyahu thinks about Iran? Do you think the Iranians lost much sleep over his speech? No, I think they looked at it and they realized this is a defeated man. Do you think that, Iran has been dealing with America for some time now? They've already taken America to the brink. They've already taken Israel to the brink. They're not going to sit there and lose any sleep over stupid political games being played as an act of theater in the American Congress. There's nothing of substance that happened there when it comes to Iran. No policies will be changed. No policies will be influenced by Netanyahu's pathetic little speech. But the insult that he delivered to the American people via the United States Congress, a compliant Congress that apparently Netanyahu believes he is bought and paid for, and by their actions in response to inviting this genocidal murderer to their house to speak, proves that they are bought and paid by Israel. The insult he had to the American people. Because again, I have watched people demonstrate in the streets of the United States for a long time. And I'll tell you, the vast majority of them I don't agree with. I wouldn't be side by side with them demonstrating for their cause. No, not at all. I would hold opposite opinions. But I would be the first one out there to protect their right to demonstrate, because that is the point. It's not what they're demonstrating. That's important to them. It's the fact that they can demonstrate that makes America the country that it is. And therefore, it is the duty and responsible of every American, whether you agree with these pro-Palestinian demonstrators or not, to shield them from attacks like the one that was leveled by Benjamin Netanyahu while he spoke in the people's house to the representatives of the people. Where were the members of Congress to stand up and shout him down when he said that? Shut up, they should have said. Shut up. You don't get to talk about freedom of speech and freedom of assembly in America. Get out of here, rush the stage, tackle him, remove him, evict him. But don't sit there and applaud while he attacks the Constitution of the United States, because that's what he did. And it just shows how feckle and baseless America has become when the people's representatives in the people's house allow such an attack to take place.
When they're talking about Iran, it seems that the intelligence in the United States and in Israel, they're giving some information to the leaders that Iran, if we fight Iran, we can defeat all of these groups in the Middle East. But it doesn't seem that would be the case. Do you think that if something happens to Iran, all these groups will disappear? Is Iran ordering them to do things, or they have their will to do that?
Oh, first of all, the will exists, independent of Iran. Hezbollah would be resisting Israel, independent of Iran. Hamas would be resisting Israel, independent of Iran. The Houthi would be resisting Israel, independent of Iran. The Shia militias in Syria and Iraq would be resisting Israel, independent of Iran. But let's not fool ourselves into believing that Iran isn't a critical aspect of the axis of resistance. Iran is a major power, a huge regional power. And Iran emboldens them with their political support and empowers them with their military and financial support. So Iran is a critical element. But let's talk about, how do you defeat Iran? How do you defeat Iran? I mean, the speculation that Iran can be defeated by Israel, by the United States, is absurd. We've been trying for years. We're continuing to try today. Iran has shown a surprising resilience. There are problems in Iran. We saw that in the last election. The low turnout shows that people are losing confidence in the system. Does the system best represent us? Now, they've elected a new president who, some people would say is a moderate reformer. I think you're not going to see any change in his foreign policy, but I do think you're going to see Iran start to reconsider some of its domestic policies, especially when it comes to women and how women are treated in Iran, because the people demand it. There are a certain element of current conservatives who, of course, will support the conservative, suppression of women in Iran. But I think the majority of people are starting to say, no, women have to be allowed to express themselves more freely than the current system allows. And I think you're seeing a recognition. And the fact that this man was allowed to enter the ballot, given the positions he have, the fact that the supreme leader has recognized him as the leader, because the supreme leader, even though the vote happened, the supreme leader, who is the final say on the Islamic Republic, could have said, no, he's incompatible with Islam, incompatible with our vision of Islam. But instead he said, yes, this is the man, which means that Iran is ready for a certain element of reforms. But that's the struggle here. Iran's not going to balk at its commitment to the axis of resistance. They're winning. I mean, what part of their winning? They are literally evicting America from the region as we speak. The American Navy cannot operate freely anymore. It doesn't have the same deterrent value anymore. The Iranians have solidified this axis of resistance, and most importantly, from my interpretation, they've inflicted fatal damage on Israel. This is the moment of the ultimate victory that's approaching, because Israel has been fatally damaged. Israel will not survive what is happening right now. If Israel's smart, they'll go into the long death, which allows for a relatively nonviolent collapse of the Zionist entity and the normal absorption of whatever is left into a singular state known as Palestine. If they're stupid, they can accelerate this process by going to war against Hezbollah and Iran. Then they'll be physically destroyed. But the end result will be the same: a singular entity known as Palestine, not Israel. Israel's dead. And this is because of Iran, because of the axis of resistance. So any idea of weakening the axis and all that, the implication is that Iran's not winning, that Iran is somehow weak, that Iran is vulnerable. That's a fantasy world. The reality is that it's Israel that's vulnerable. It's the United States that's weak, because Israel and the United States aren't winning. They're losing. John Boyd's OODA loop in the observe, orient, decide, act, decision-making cycle. The idea there is to get inside your enemies or your adversaries' decision-making cycle, to make them react to you. Let's just take a look at what's been happening in the Middle East. Who's reacting to whom? Who has the initiative? It ain't the United States, and it ain't Israel. They're reacting. If this was a dogfight between fighter aircraft, America and the Israelis would be shot down every time. If this was maneuver warfare on a large scale, we'd be outmaneuvered every time and defeated. And this is the same place in terms of geopolitics. The United States and Israel are reacting, and every time they react, they bleed off speed, they bleed off capability, they increase their own friction. Meanwhile, Iran, the axis of resistance, is initiating when they want to initiate. It's a frictionless transition. The more friction, the slower you get. The less friction, the faster you get. Inside the decision-making cycle, Iran is prevailing. The axis of resistance is prevailing. So that's the reality. Any discussion in the West about weakening Iran, it's absurd. It's fantasy driven.
the United States does not want escalation in the Middle East. It simply does not. Indeed, I think the United States would like to see the Israelis win, whatever that means, in Gaza, end that war, so that we have a stable Middle East. That's the American goal, no escalation. The Israelis are a different matter. First point I would make there is I actually believe the Israelis wouldn't mind a general conflagration because that would facilitate ethnic cleansing. I think the Israelis are interested in cleansing not only Gaza, where they've made their views manifestly clear in recent months, but I think they're also interested in cleansing the West Bank. And a general conflagration would make it easier for them to do it. I'm not saying they could succeed at cleansing both places, but it would make it easier. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are some people who in Israel who want escalation for that reason. I think the other reason they want escalation, which I have no doubt about, is that they have a huge problem on their northern border, the border with Hezbollah. Most accounts say that there are about 200,000 Israelis who have been displaced from their homes, either in northern Israel or in southern Israel. And of course, it's the Gaza conflict in southern Israel that explains what's going on there. So let's say there are 100,000 people from southern Israel who have been displaced by the Gaza conflict. There are another 100,000 who have been displaced by what's going on in the north. And this is a huge problem for the Israelis. And the question is, how do they move those people back to northern Israel until the conflict with Hamas, until the conflict with Hezbollah is settled and Hezbollah stops firing rockets, missile, and artillery rounds into northern Israel? Well, as long as the war in Gaza goes on, I believe the Hezbollah will continue to target northern Israel, again, because of what's going on in Gaza. So what the Israelis would like to do is they would like to use military force. They'd like to escalate. They think they have escalation domination here, or escalation dominance here. I think they'd like to escalate against Hezbollah, inflict massive punishment on not only Hezbollah, but Lebanon more generally, and work out some sort of modus vivendi with Hezbollah that allows them to move those 100,000 or so Israelis back to northern Israel. So I think that's what's going on. And I think it's a very dangerous situation. I think the Americans understand that. And given that the Americans don't want escalation, I think this is why they're putting great pressure on Israel not to escalate the war against Hezbollah. Yeah, let me make two observations, Bassam. The first is I actually find it stunning the extent to which Israelis across the board don't seem to care about Palestinian deaths. It's really quite remarkable. And I think it has to do with the fact that over time, the Israelis, almost all of them, have ended up dehumanizing the Palestinians. I believe that most Israelis just think that the Palestinians deserve what they're getting. There's remarkably little sympathy for what's happening to the Palestinians inside of Israel. And by the way, there's remarkably little sympathy for what's happening to the Palestinians among Israel's supporters in the West, which I must say I also find quite shocking. One can make an argument that there should be no sympathy among Israel's supporters or among Israelis for Hamas. One can understand that argument. But when you look at what's being done to the civilian population, to all those women and children, it's just sickening, and it doesn't seem to bother the Israeli public. I mean, there are certainly exceptions to that, Gideon Levy and so forth and so on, but not many exceptions. And here in the United States and in Western Europe, you see a similar situation. So I think it's quite shocking. And you want to, by the way, ask yourself then, what does this mean for the future? For the next couple months, the next couple of years, where is this train going? I often ask myself that. As bad as things are now, things can get much worse. Anyway, that's my first point. Second point I would make to you is I do believe that the Israelis see this as an opportunity. There have been, as you know better than I, two big cases of ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in the past. The first was in 1948, and the second was in 1967 on the West Bank. And both of those cases of ethnic cleansing took place in the context of a war. If you look at what's happening now, we obviously have a war. And it's hardly surprising that all of a sudden people are talking about ethnic cleansing. I believe before October 7th, there's no question that in the back of their minds, most Israeli elites thought seriously about ethnic cleansing. They thought about it because ethnic cleansing was a way of solving the apartheid problem, right? The fact that there were so many Palestinians inside Greater Israel, and Israel needed an apartheid state to deal with that problem, meant that they had to find a solution. And ethnic cleansing, I believe, most Israelis understood, most Israeli elites understood, was the solution to the apartheid problem. So before October 7th, they thought about it, but they fully understood that the opportunity to make ethnic cleansing work was simply not there. But as soon as October 7th happens, it's on the front burner because people understand you have a war taking place. And in a war, there may be an opportunity to cleanse the Palestinians, at least in Gaza. And I believe that the initial campaign against the Palestinians in Gaza, the Palestinians, that was aimed at pushing the Palestinians out of Gaza. They were interested, the Israelis were interested in ethnic cleansing from the beginning. And just to take this one step further and repeat something I said a few minutes ago, I believe that the Israelis would not mind at all a general war in the Middle East that involved Lebanon, maybe even Iran, because the more widespread the war, the more widespread the fighting, the greater the opportunity for ethnic cleansing. And it's manifestly clear that the Israelis are very interested in ethnic cleansing at this point in time. Again, to go back where we started, as the South African application to the ICJ makes very clear. Let's assume that at some point, the military campaign now taking place in Gaza comes to an end. The question is, what happens with the Gaza issue and the Israel issue more generally? And my view is that this is not going to go away. And there's going to be a lot of discussion of the issues that we're talking about today regarding Israel and the Palestinians for the foreseeable future. Now, you ask me, why do I say that? First of all, there's no simple solution to the Gaza problem. We didn't get into this. This is another one of these subjects that I've spent a lot of time studying. The Israelis are not going to defeat Hamas. Hamas is going to remain intact. It's going to remain a formidable force inside of Gaza. And as long as that's the case, there is no pretty solution, no simple solution from an Israeli point of view to shutting down future trouble from Gaza. So Gaza is going to be a festering wound in Israel's side for a long period of time. And that is going to bring a lot of attention to Israel and to Gaza and to the Palestinians. Furthermore, the question you have to ask yourself as well, the other question you have to ask yourself as well, is what happens inside Israel itself? What happens as a result of what's going on in Gaza and other factors as well. Israel is a country that has powerful centrifugal forces at play inside of it. As I'm sure both of you know, before October 7th, there was much talk of a civil war inside of Israel because of this basic law that the government actually did push through that limited the power of the judiciary. It caused a huge amount of trouble. Now there's a big battle taking place inside Israel on whether or not there should be a commission set up to examine the IDF's failures on October 7th. There's also a big battle taking place inside the cabinet in Israel on what to do with Gaza once the war ends or once the shooting starts. There's huge disagreement, right? Furthermore, there's the whole question of Hezbollah. Furthermore, there's the whole fact that Israel is an apartheid state, which has become increasingly clear. And the question of what this means for settling the Israel-Palestinian conflict is front and center these days and is not going to go away. People are going to be talking about a two-state solution, this kind of solution, that kind of solution. More and more people are going to be talking about the fact that Israel is an apartheid state. And furthermore, to make matters worse, the Israelis, who are actually trying to ethnically cleanse the West Bank in a more subtle way than they're trying to ethnically cleanse Gaza, are going to continue to try to cleanse the West Bank. They're going to try to push out all of the Palestinians from the occupied territories. This issue is not going away. So I would argue that if you look at Gaza and you look at the West Bank and what the future holds for those two pieces of territory, and you look at the Israeli society, the Israeli body politic, you just see lots of trouble for as far as the eye can see. I mean, the fact is that Israel is a country that is in really deep trouble, right? And I think, from reading the Israeli press, lots of people understand that. There is no simple way out here. And the fact that, to go back to where we started, that we're talking about a situation where on January 11th, Israel is going to have to appear before the International Court of Justice to make the case that it's not engaged in genocide really tells you something powerful about where Israel is as a society. So anyway, all of this is a long-winded way of saying to you, Bassam, that I think that even after the shooting stops and the dust begins to settle, that these issues are going to garner a huge amount of attention. But I want to be very clear on this. I hope the killing stops. I mean, I hope the military campaign now being waged in Gaza stops very soon. I mean, I think what's happening here, it's horrible, absolutely horrible. So, I mean, I agree completely with what you said, and I tried to say it myself, that after the shooting stops, it's not going to be harmony by any means. There's going to be huge trouble in the years ahead. I clearly understand that, but I think it's imperative that we do everything we can to shut this one down as soon as possible, because this is a genocide. And if you don't think it's a genocide, at least it's a case of mass murder. It's murder on a huge scale, and this needs to be shut down, in my humble opinion, immediately. Okay, but to go back to the question of what happens afterwards, look, Israel, you didn't use the word, I'll use the word. Israel is an apartheid state, right? Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and B'Tselem, which is a distinguished human rights organization inside of Israel, all three of those human rights organizations have written lengthy reports which lay out in detail why Israel is an apartheid state. And I think there's no question about that. And we have inside Greater Israel, we have inside Greater Israel about 7.3 million Palestinians and about 7.3 million Jews. We have rough equality. And the only way that the Israelis can deal with that situation is to have an apartheid state, right? Because if they go to democracy, if you have a democratic one state solution, that one state will end up being a Palestinian state. And the Israeli Jews are never going to accept that, right? So you get apartheid. And by the way, just to get off topic for a second, this is why ethnic cleansing is so attractive to the Israelis, because ethnic cleansing is seen as the solution to apartheid. But anyway, back to apartheid. You have an apartheid state in Greater Israel. You have two populations that are of roughly equal size, and one wants to dominate the other. And it does dominate it in a cruel and systematic way, right? And needless to say, the victims are not going to take that sitting down, or at least not all of them are. And you're going to get a first intifada, you're going to get a second intifada, and you're going to get October 7th. And this is likely to happen again and again and again. And the question is, how can the Israelis get out of this situation? And the argument that Steve Walt and I made in the article and in the book, and we've made over time, and many other people have made, is that the Israelis should have accepted a two-state solution a long time ago, and they should have gone to great lengths to give the Palestinians a viable state of their own, and worked overtime and worked with the United States to work out some sort of meaningful modus vivendi between those two states. Now, lots of American presidents understood that. They understood that. Going back to Jimmy Carter and marching forward, virtually every president understood that the best solution, not a good solution, but the best solution to putting an end to this, or trying to put an end to it, was to create a two-state solution. But we could never get to first base. We couldn't even get out of the batter's box in trying to implement a two-state solution. Why? Because of the lobby. Ask Barack Obama about that. He'll tell you about the scars he has on his body, right? So we were unsuccessful. Now, can you imagine a two-state solution now? It's impossible to imagine a two-state solution, especially given where Israel is at this point in time. Just look at the composition of the cabinet that runs Israel, and then just think about what's happened since October 7th. Two-state solution? So where does that leave you? It leaves you with an apartheid state. And it leaves you, as I said before, with a festering problem in Gaza. It leaves you with a festering problem on your northern flank vis-a-vis Hezbollah. It leaves you with a festering problem in the West Bank. And at the same time, because of alternative media, because of the internet, because of cameras on iPhones, it's very easy for the rest of the world to see what you're doing. And the United States may support you, but the question you have to ask yourself is, the United States going to be there forever? And I tend to think that's true, but maybe not. And so I think from Israel's point of view, they're in deep trouble. They made, in my humble opinion, the Israelis made a huge mistake not moving to a two-state solution, or at least not attempting to facilitate a two-state solution. And the lobby bears much responsibility for that failure on the part of the United States to get Israel to move in that direction.
For 500 years, through enslavement, colonial policy, and repression, the West managed to form a global capitalist system, which for many years ensured the dominance of Western countries over the rest of the world. Since the mid-20th century, the United States has become the leader of this global capitalist system. For decades, globalists in Washington have successfully developed and maintained a unipolar world system. During this time, globalists turned the West and its so-called golden billion into the center of the world. In this unipolar world, hegemony and complete domination belonged only to the West, while the rest of the countries, including Russia, were thrown into the zone of so-called peripheral capitalism. All this allowed the globalists to strengthen the unipolar world and eliminate any threats to the global dominance of the West. For decades, globalists in Washington have imposed sanctions, declared wars, and staged color revolutions against those countries that tried to show independence and develop their economies. The truth is that the West, led by globalists, does not need economically strong and independent countries, even among its so-called allies. The fact is that the economic and geopolitical development of the rest of the world weakens the dominance of the West, accelerating the process of the arrival of a multipolar world. And for many decades, it was Russia that was the main stimulator of this multipolar world. If we look at history, we see that all the wars that the West waged against Russia had only one goal: the weakening and destruction of this huge country. However, unfortunately for the West, Russia has always emerged victorious from these wars, and has only become stronger. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, also drew attention to this fact. According to him, history repeats itself. Sergei Lavrov noted that the conflict in Ukraine, which the United States unleashed, made Russia only stronger, as it was after the victories over Adolf Hitler and Napoleon Bonaparte. According to Sergei Lavrov, in the 19th century, Napoleon united Europe against Russia, but in the end, he was defeated. In the 20th century, Adolf Hitler did the same thing. He forced almost all European countries to join the Wehrmacht and attack Russia. As a result, Hitler was overwhelmingly defeated, and Russia became much stronger after this war. And now, in the 21st century, the United States has also united all Western countries against Russia. Sergei Lavrov added that unfortunately for the West, another war, this time in Ukraine, has once again made Russia only stronger. And despite all the evidence that the weakening and destruction of Russia is a priority goal of globalists in Washington and London, many experts continue to argue that Moscow should be friends with the West and try to build trusting relationships. Sometimes, some so-called experts never cease to amaze me with their statements. When the so-called experts, as well as systemic and non-systemic liberals, declare that Russia doesn't need to quarrel with the West, that Russia needs to be friends with the West, open borders, cooperate, and so on, all this makes me laugh. Russia could have believed such statements 30 years ago, when it was very naive. Back then, in Russia, it seemed to many, even adequate people, that it was only necessary to remove the Iron Curtain and everything will get better. At that time, many believed that the West had no plans to destroy Russia, to pump out its resources. Many believed that everyone would live as friends on this planet. Of course, after a few years, all these naive thoughts disappeared. Instead of a peaceful existence, the West began to openly support those politicians who plundered Russia. Let me remind you that it was with the most direct participation of the West that predatory privatization took place in Russia. The globalists split off the countries of the former USSR from Russia, fostering Russophobic nationalist sentiments there. And NATO continued to expand to the east. But why did I say all this? As the history of Russia shows, the accelerated development of this huge country occurs only when it has an external enemy, when the citizens of Russia are in a state of geopolitical conflict. If relations with the West become friendly, this automatically means the degradation of Russia. After all, even if we look at the past 30 years, these 3 decades can be divided into the following periods. The 90s. Russia is friends with the West, which subsequently leads to the complete degradation of the country. In the period 2000 to 2014, Russia maintains neutrality with the West, which subsequently leads to stabilization and the solution of many internal political problems. From 2014 to the present day, Russia is in a state of confrontation with the West, which subsequently led to a radical change in the country's development vector and a complete restart of the economy. I want you to understand once and for all, one banal thing: the West is not interested in equal partnership and friendship with Russia. The West hates Russia on a subconscious level, because it understands that this huge country with its richest resources will never become a colony, or semi-colony of the West. Russians will never agree to give up their natural resources in exchange for Western goods. The West could impose such a model of relations on Russia for a while, but in the long term, it has no prospects. The accelerated development of Russia occurs only when it is in a state of conflict. Historically, the Kremlin begins to think about the development of Russia in deeds and not just in words, only in the event of an external threat. I still cannot understand, why didn't Kremlin create a national payment system before 2014? Russia could have easily created such a system. However, Moscow started creating it after there was a real threat of Russia's disconnection from SWIFT. Also, I cannot understand, why didn't Russia start import substitution before 2014? Moscow could do it without any problems. However, the Russian government began to do this only after Russia was sanctioned and deprived of access to advanced technologies. And I can give a huge number of such examples. Now we have a new round of geopolitical tensions. Perhaps even more significant than in 2014. Lavrov declared that if no compromise is reached, Russia's response will be military technical. There is only one thing you can be sure of, namely that something will surely happen. And, therefore, the escalation will increase. The Russian economy will work in mobilization mode. And this is Russia's chance. A chance to get rid of liberal monetarism, sending it to the dustbin of history. A chance to gain true economic sovereignty. Put an end to the fifth column inside the government. And it's only the beginning. It looks like the Russians are ready to go all the way. There is one important point in all this. I would advise Putin not to separate domestic and foreign policy. It is necessary to deal with all areas, since they are directly dependent on each other. Unfortunately, in terms of domestic policy, Russia has an imbalance. The fact is that Russia has a sovereign foreign policy, but at the same time its economy is still built into the globalist system of the world order. Putin must put an end to this. And the sooner he does that, the better it will be not only for Russia itself, but for the rest of the world. And judging by what is happening now, Putin is gradually achieving his goal. The Russian economy is gradually emerging from the influence of the globalist system. The current war in Ukraine and unprecedented Western sanctions have allowed Russia to unleash its full potential both on the battlefield and in the economic arena. Russia's economy has become much stronger and continues to develop rapidly, while its army has gained invaluable experience in waging war against NATO armies. Thus, we can conclude that history has indeed repeated itself. Another war unleashed by the globalists has made Russia great again.
Venezuelan presidential election could be the most consequential in nearly a decade. Experts say nothing less than the future of Venezuelan democracy could be at stake. The nation's increasingly authoritarian president, Nicolas Maduro, is running to extend his time in the office he assumed in 2013.
If you don't want Venezuela to fall in a bloodshed, let's guarantee the biggest electoral success in the history of our people.
Polls show him trailing challenger Edmundo González Urrutia by a large margin. González was an obscure retired diplomat with no political aspirations until a coalition of opposition parties picked him as its candidate.
I want to call on all Venezuelans to join me in a peaceful and orderly change of government.
He has the backing of Maria Corina Machado, the driving force behind the opposition. After winning a primary with more than 90% of the vote, the Maduro government banned her from running.
This moment we are living is the closing of a cycle of chaos to begin an era of order and stability and security.
Together, they've energized voters by promising to reestablish democratic institutions and end the economic and human rights crises that have led more than 7 million Venezuelans to leave the country over the past 10 years. Many sought refuge in neighboring Colombia and Brazil. Last year, U.S. authorities encountered tens of thousands of Venezuelans along the southern border. If the polls hold true and Maduro does lose, some analysts are skeptical that he would readily accept defeat and give up power. Alexandra Winkler is a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She's also a former deputy mayor of El Hatillo, which is...
we don't hear that propaganda from her. I just want to show y'all what they were saying about the Venezuela elections, so we can know that they do probably plan on, they want to go to war with Venezuela to steal that oil. Venezuela got more oil than Saudi Arabia, and the U.S. has been keeping them impoverished.
Why has the United States been so obsessed with trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela? There's not just one simple answer to that question. There are several factors. It is true that one of those factors is the fact that Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves.
Venezuela. How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door.
But the U.S. is also the world's largest producer of oil. So there's no shortage of oil in the U.S. Now, yes, of course, many U.S. companies want to get access to Venezuela's oil, and Venezuela's oil was nationalized by the leftist president, Hugo Chavez, who kicked out the U.S. oil corporation.
We're looking at the oil assets. That's the single most important income stream to the government of Venezuela. We're looking at what to do to that. We want everybody to know we're looking at all this very seriously. We don't want any American businesses or investors caught by surprise. They can see what President Trump did yesterday. We're following through on it. We're in conversation with major American companies now that are either in Venezuela or in the case of Citgo here in the United States. I think we're trying to get to the same end result here. You know, it'll make a big difference to the United States economically if we could have American oil companies really invest in and produce the oil capabilities in Venezuela.
So that's
disgusting, man. It's so disgusting that they're talking about it. It just would be so great if America could invest in and produce the oil of Venezuela. No, it would be great for Venezuelans if they produce their own oil and invest in their own shit. That's disgusting. And remember, the reason you have so many immigrants coming from Venezuela right now committing crimes in America is because the U.S. policies, sanctions, trying to starve the Venezuelan people so they can blame it on the government and say, see, your policies are causing the people to come to America. We have no choice but to attack you. But the war is about the oil. They can't help themselves.
Certainly a factor in the U.S. government backing numerous coup attempts trying to overthrow Venezuela's democratically elected left-wing government. But it's not just because of oil. There are other factors that are also very important that I'm going to be talking about today. Because the reality is that Venezuela, ever since the rise of the leftist president Hugo Chavez, who declared the Bolivarian Revolution and turned Venezuela into a Bolivarian republic.
They killed this man with cancer. See, that's when all of the leaders understood the CIA was using different tactics. They killed him with cancer. He came to the UN and said that he said, I smell sulfur at this podium. George Bush had just left. He said, Satan has been here.
Ever since then, Venezuela has played a very important role in trying to build a multipolar world, challenging US hegemony, trying to form alliances not only with other countries in Latin America in a regional bloc to weaken their dependency on the US economy and the US dollar, but Venezuela has also deepened its friendship with other major powers like China, like Russia, like Iran. Venezuela has also helped to create new international organizations that try to unify Latin America, like, for instance, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, the CELAC, or the ALBA, the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America. For many years, Venezuela has also pushed for alternatives to the US dollar, and Venezuela has sold its oil in other currencies. And Venezuela has tried to develop an alternative to the US-led capitalist system, which also explains why, for instance, the US has imposed for more than 60 years a brutal blockade on Cuba, of course, a close ally of Venezuela. And Venezuela has been suffering under a similar blockade, very harsh sanctions imposed by the US, trying to suffocate the Venezuelan economy, just like it has tried to suffocate the Cuban economy for decades. So today I'm going to show a presentation that I delivered for a virtual conference on Venezuela and its July elections, talking about what's at stake in these elections, why the US government has been meddling in Venezuela's internal affairs, trying to overthrow the Bolivarian government, first trying to overthrow President Hugo Chavez, and ever since trying to overthrow President Nicolas Maduro, and why the US has been backing right-wing opposition forces that not only want to privatize Venezuela's oil and allow US oil companies to profit, but furthermore, the US-backed opposition wants to break Venezuela's friendship with China, with Russia, with Iran, with the BRICS bloc, and they want to subordinate Venezuela and Latin America as a whole to the United States. We've seen this happen numerous times in Latin America. When there is a US-backed coup and a right-wing government comes to power, they withdraw from all of the other regional organizations like CELAC and ALBA. They withdraw from BRICS, like is what happened in Argentina under the far-right leader Javier Milei, who rejected the invitation to join BRICS. So today I'm going to talk about the geopolitics of Venezuela and how the Bolivarian Revolution has played a very key role in building a multipolar world. So without further ado, this is the presentation that I delivered at a virtual conference organized by the independent news website Orinoco Tribune and also by the International Manifesto Group. Today I'll be discussing Venezuela's very important role in helping to build a multipolar world. This is very important because this is a term that we've heard more and more in the past few years. Even recently, the foreign policy chief of the European Union, Josep Borrell, has acknowledged that Western dominance is over, and he has acknowledged that we're in an increasingly multipolar world. You'll see mainstream corporate media outlets like The Economist, the Financial Times acknowledge that we're in a multipolar world. But Venezuela has played a very important role in this. When we talk about multipolarity, it's not simply the rise of China, the reemergence of Russia, other, powers like Iran, Brazil, India, but also Venezuela has played a very significant role. And the Bolivarian Revolution has been very significant in this process. And Hugo Chavez himself was extremely prescient. And in 1998, when Chavez was still campaigning for the presidential election. He gave a speech in the Palacio de las Academias on the 12th of August, and he famously said, quote, "The world of the 21st century that already appears on the horizon will not be bipolar nor unipolar, thank God. It will be multipolar." Now, I really want to emphasize how prescient and incredible this was. In 1998, this is the peak of US unipolarity with the overthrow of the Soviet Union in 1991, then the Gulf War leading up to the invasion of Iraq, the US government's declaration of full spectrum dominance, the Wolfowitz Doctrine. And a year before Chavez made this speech, Brzezinski published his famous book, The Grand Chessboard, in which he talked about the strategy by which the US would try to maintain this unipolar order to prevent the emergence of any powers that could challenge US hegemony. So the fact that Chavez could see this,
also
so
wanted Chavez dead because he talked about his bloodline to us. He talked about his African Latin roots. So did Castro. So did Gaddafi. That's why they hate those type of revolutionaries who show us so much honor and respect and fight with us. They can't stand that type of revolutionary.
So early is a testament to how brilliant he was in his vision, not only for Venezuela, not only for Latin America as a regional bloc, but for the world.
He said he was Afro-Latin.
Now that quote is well known. What is not as well known is the larger context. So in this speech that we have a transcript of, I posted the link, the source here. I translated the larger context of the quote. He continues saying in this quote that there is obviously a North American pole. He noted that there was a European pole that had emerged with the European Union. At this time, many people still thought that Europe might be a more independent pole, although, of course, we've seen that in the past 20 years, the EU has been completely subordinated to the United States, which has only gotten worse with the proxy war in Ukraine. Chavez acknowledged an Asian pole. He also said, very importantly, China is rising. And he could see this very clearly. This is before China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001 and saw incredible world historic double-digit GDP growth. But still, he could see very clearly that China was rising. He talked about the Asian tigers, which had gone through the 1997 Asian financial crisis, but he noted that they still made effort to lift themselves up. But what's very important is Chavez also said, look, Latin America must be an important pole in this multipolar world. With great effort, he said, we have an obligation as well as the need to propel the formation in the medium term of a true world power in this part of the world, in this part of the American continent. And he noted that Venezuela could be a hinge, not only in South America, but linking Central America to South America, linking the Caribbean to Latin America.
And that's why Europe really hate these nations. Why? Because you pay attention to the African nations, these Latin American nations, Russia. These nations have all the resources they need. They have just been getting stopped from progressing by the imperialists, NATO, the Europeans, the West. They have been stopping these nations. These nations have everything they need. This is a revolutionary nation with more oil than Saudi Arabia. They're supposed to be swimming in the wealth. But because they didn't want to listen to the U.S., they're impoverished. That's nonsense.
America. And of course, the fact that he could see the rise of China in the 1990s is very important. Of course, this is probably the most important geopolitical development of the 21st century is the economic rise of China, overtaking the United States as the world's largest economy, according to IMF data in 2017. Today, China, when its GDP is measured at purchasing power parity, represents 19% of world GDP. And that's actually probably an understatement because of the way China measures GDP. It actually emphasizes manufacturing production and downplays services, whereas a huge part of US GDP is fictitious capital in the financial sector. The US also does computed GDP using, for instance, owner-occupied housing. So what you would charge if you were renting your house, and that's computed into GDP. So the point is if you look at the chart on the right, you can see that China has become the world's largest manufacturing power by far, representing 35% of global gross production in manufacturing. So the fact that Chavez could see this, I mean, again, is a testament to how much of a visionary he was. And Chavez took his first trip to China in 1999, his first year of his presidency. And this was also important because it marked the 50th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. It also marked the 25th anniversary of Venezuela's relations with China. And this year, 2024, they just celebrated their 50th anniversary and had an event that I attended in Beijing. Furthermore, in a speech that Chavez gave when he visited Peking University in 1999, he said, quote, "We have begun to produce an autonomous world politics independent of any center of power. And in that, we are also like China." So emphasizing this increasing multipolarity back in the 1990s. Now, Chavez visited China more than any other leader in Latin America and the Caribbean, and multiple times throughout his terms. And in 2001, he met with Jiang Zemin, and they declared a strategic partnership for common development. And that has very much continued and strengthened under President Nicolás Maduro. And in 2023, Maduro visited China and signed 31 comprehensive agreements, including they formally upgraded their relations to what China refers to as an all-weather strategic partnership, which is one of the highest designations at the level of Pakistan. Very important for China-Venezuela relations. Now, if this is a chart that looks at the number of agreements signed between China and Venezuela as of 2017, so this could very much be updated with scores of more, well over 500. But as between 1974 and 1998, before the Bolivarian Revolution, before Chavez and Maduro, Venezuela and China only had signed 20 agreements. From 1999 to 2017, in just 18 years, they signed 472 agreements. This really emphasizes how important this friendship is. And this is a chart that shows trade between Venezuela and China, which is so important because, as I'll be talking about with sanctions, China, being the world's largest economy, has been an economic lifeline that has allowed Venezuela to pursue an alternative path, trying to build socialism, challenging neoliberalism and US-led imperialism. And if you look in the 1990s, trade was basically zero. In the 2000s, there was trade, but it was pretty negligible. And it started increasing in the late 2000s and exploded in the 2010s, especially under President Maduro. And what's interesting about this chart is you can see that actually Venezuela has enjoyed a trade surplus with China. Of course, most of that is oil exports, but that's still important because, of course, China has a massive current account surplus and it has a massive trade surplus with many countries. But with Venezuela and also with Brazil, it actually has a trade deficit. And this is extremely important because the US has tried to crush Venezuela through sanctions and a blockade. And this chart on the left, you can see that Venezuela's oil production, it's not a coincidence, it collapsed, first of all, when the US pressured Saudi Arabia in the 2010s to collapse international oil prices. This is before Saudi Arabia was pursuing a more independent, non-aligned policy. And John Kerry took a trip to Riyadh and made an agreement in which the US provided more and more support to the extremist far-right forces, the Contras in Syria, in an attempt to overthrow the Syrian government. And in return, Saudi Arabia massively overproduced oil, which collapsed the price of oil in the international market, which also was an attempt to crush not only Venezuela, but also Iran, to try to pressure Iran to go to the negotiating table of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. And of course, it was an attempt to punish Russia after the US-backed coup in Ukraine in 2014 and the annexation of Crimea, which had historically been part of Russia and was only given as basically a formality when Ukraine and Russia were part of the Soviet Union. And the US was trying to suffocate Russia's economy with the imposition of sanctions, and then furthermore, with the collapse of oil prices. Following that, the Obama administration declared Venezuela to be a so-called extraordinary and unusual threat to the national security of the United States. And that led to capital flight It led to international investors refusing to invest in Venezuela because of fear of US sanctions, which followed many rounds of aggressive sanctions that started under Obama and accelerated under Trump and have continued under Biden. And you can see it's not a coincidence that oil production in Venezuela collapsed. And in fact, the US Energy Information Administration boasts of this on its website, noting that Venezuelan oil production fell to its lowest levels in 2019 at the peak of the US-led coup attempt, the lowest level since 2003 when the US orchestrated the coup that briefly succeeded just 2 days in Venezuela in April 2002. And then there was an oil lockout, a boss's fake strike led by pro-imperialist elements in PDVSA, the oil company. So Venezuela is in some ways part of this global trend. This map should be updated. This map shows how China has become the largest trading partner of a plurality of countries on Earth. Actually, it recently became a majority of countries on Earth. And Venezuela has also, its largest trading partner is now China. This should be updated. But the point is that Venezuela has been part of a global trend, but it has been at the vanguard of this trend. Along with Latin America as a whole, you can see that in the early 2000s, trade with China was still very, very low, but it has absolutely exploded to such an extent that now China is the largest trading partner of Latin America as a whole, if you exclude Mexico. Now, of course, here I've been speaking a lot about Venezuela's partnership with China, which is very important, but it's not just that. Under Hugo Chavez, Venezuela deepened its relationship with Russia and also with Iran. And under President Maduro, Venezuela has continued strengthening its friendship with these countries. This is, of course, very important. The US sees Russia and Iran as some of its main strategic adversaries. And in fact, when a US Army general, Christopher Cavoli, was testifying for the Senate Armed Services Committee, he referred to China, Russia, Iran, and the DPRK, that is North Korea, as a so-called axis of adversaries. So the fact that Venezuela has been forming a close partnership with these countries is another reason why the US has been so desperate to try to destabilize Venezuela, to overthrow its independent government. But the reason that I focus so much on Venezuela's partnership with China in particular is because China is by far the most powerful country that's an alternative to US-led imperialism. China has become the world's largest economy. And if you listen to the speeches given by US officials, they constantly say that China is the biggest so-called long-term threat, because although Russia is a significant power militarily and politically, and it is a significant economy, China is the world's largest economy. It has 1.4 billion people. It has an even larger military, and China continues to grow and develop very rapidly. And that's why US officials are so afraid of China. And they say, for instance, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said that China is the only country that can actually create a global alternative to US-led dominance, to the so-called rules-based international order in which the US makes the rules and orders everyone around. So this is why Venezuela's partnership with China is so important, because every time there's been a revolution in Latin America or in the global South, but especially in Latin America, in Cuba in 1959, in Nicaragua in 1979, and then following under Hugo Chavez in 1999 in Venezuela, every single time one of these governments comes to power, the US tries to overthrow them with coups, like the CIA overthrew the elected prime minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, in 1953, or the CIA overthrew the elected left-wing leader of Guatemala in 1954. And there are dozens and dozens of other examples like Sukarno in Indonesia and Nkrumah in Ghana and so many other examples. Every time one of these progressive, independent, anti-imperialist leaders comes to power, they're targeted by the US with not only a coup, but also sanctions. Cuba has been under illegal US sanctions and illegal US blockade ever since 1960, 61, 62. And the US has tried to suffocate the Cuban economy to overthrow the Cuban government, the same thing that it has done in Venezuela. A US State Department cable from 1960 admitted that the goal of the US sanctions on Cuba was to weaken the economic life of Cuba. That's a quote. To, quote, make the greatest inroads in denying money and supplies to Cuba, to decrease monetary and real wages, to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of government. That's the goal of the US blockade on Cuba. That's the goal of the US blockade on Venezuela. That's the goal of the US sanctions on Nicaragua, on Iran, on Syria, on Zimbabwe, on the DPRK, on Russia, and on China. But of course, the difference is that Venezuela, Syria, Zimbabwe, the DPRK are relatively small countries. China is one of the world's biggest countries with 1.4 billion people. It has the world's largest economy. So yes, Russia is a significant power, and Russia has provided support to Venezuela and Cuba and other independent countries. But China actually has the power to fundamentally transform the global economy so that US sanctions no longer can destroy economies. So that essentially US sanctions, maybe they're not insignificant, they still are felt by the countries suffering under them, but they're no longer the kind of death sentence that they have been for decades. So this is why it's so important to look at Venezuela's partnership with China and to see how important it has been and how Venezuela has really punched above its weight in geopolitics and shown that it's possible for a country in Latin America to challenge US imperialism and neocolonialism, the idea, this arrogant neocolonialist idea that Latin America is the so-called backyard of the US. And instead, Venezuela has helped to forge a new multipolar path in the world by deepening these partnerships, not only politically, but also economically, challenging US-led imperialism and challenging the dollar system and trying to build alternatives with new organizations like BRICS. Now, President Maduro has applied officially for Venezuela to join BRICS, and Maduro said that BRICS represents the potential, quote, new world order without hegemony, without empires, without colonialism of free and independent countries. And BRICS, of course, although there are internal contradictions, it represents an economic alternative to US-led imperialism. And the BRICS economy is largely because of China, but also to a lesser extent because of India and Russia, which have seen very large economic growth in recent years. The BRICS countries have overtaken the G7 as the largest economic bloc when their GDP is measured at purchasing power parity. And again, if you look at GDP, you're not talking about what kind of economic production is happening in the economy, goods and services. If you also look at things like production of major commodities, if you look at wheat, oil, gas, iron ore, and manufacturing production capabilities, BRICS is certainly significantly more important than the G7. Another way in which Venezuela, and in particular Chavez, but also Maduro, have been extremely, extremely prescient is in not only discussions of de-dollarization, but attempts to try to create tangible alternatives to the US dollar system. And as far back as 2007, and actually even before, Chavez had talked about the importance of challenging the dollar. But in 2007, he made the concrete proposal for the creation of the Sucre. And this actually happened in 2009 with the creation of the Sucre, the unified system for regional compensation. And that was created in 2009. And from 2010 until 2016, it was used for over $1 billion worth of trade. And it was mostly with Ecuador. And then with the basically internal coup after Rafael Correa left power in 2017. And you had the rise of Lenin Moreno, who basically, he was a traitor who did a kind of internal coup. And then you subsequently had right-wing pro-imperialist governments that led to the death of the Sucre. But this is very important because today we've seen, for instance, Lula da Silva in Brazil has really talked once again about the importance of challenging US dollar hegemony He's called for creating a Latin American currency. And of course, Brazil is the B in BRICS. He took a trip to China in 2023 and went to the New Development Bank, which is currently headed by former Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff, and talked about the importance of creating alternatives to the dollar. This is, of course, very important and very welcome, but this is well over a decade after Venezuela played a lead role in actually creating a Latin American currency. And because of the series of coups in the region, the rise of right-wing governments, that we did see the unfortunate death of the Sucre in the short term. But I do think that in the long term, the medium to the long term, Chavez and Maduro and the Bolivarian Revolution will be shown to be extremely visionary. Now, of course, the institution that helped to oversee the creation of the Sucre was the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our Americas. And as is often forgotten, it's not just the ALBA, but also the TCP, which stands for the People's Trade Treaty. So the idea is to create an alternative to neoliberal free trade fundamentalism, which in reality is not free trade, it's freedom for foreign investors. The vast majority of so-called free trade agreements, they're not so concerned about free trade, they're concerned about making sure that foreign capital concentrated in the US on Wall Street, in City of London, that they have so-called freedom of investment with no capital control, so they can move very speculative capital flows and hot money in and out of the country without any limitations. But the ALBA TCP has always been an alternative for what a regional trade bloc could look like. And of course, this is why the US has targeted the ALBA and has pressured every government in the region to withdraw from and sabotage ALBA. And the photo on the left showing ALBA in the first iteration back when Chavez was still in power before his death in 2013, you can see that almost all of the leaders in this photo were targeted by US coups. So in the case of, on the right of the photo, you can see Manuel Zelaya, the elected president of Honduras, who was overthrown in a US-backed right-wing military coup in 2009. You can see to the right of him, to our left, is Evo Morales, the president of Bolivia, who was overthrown in a US-backed coup in 2019. You can see, of course, Chavez, who was a victim of a US-backed coup in 2002, and many constant, never-ending coup attempts subsequently. And then, of course, you have Daniel Ortega, the Sandinista leader, the president of Nicaragua, and he was targeted in a very violent coup attempt that failed in 2018. And of course, there was the Contra death squads in the 1980s. So it's not a coincidence that the US has targeted all of these leaders for overthrow. And after Rafael Correa left power in Ecuador in 2017, the internal coup happened and Ecuador withdrew from the ALBA. And after the 2009 coup against Zelaya in Honduras, the right-wing coup regime also withdrew from ALBA. And after the US-backed coup against Evo in Bolivia in 2019, Bolivia also withdrew from ALBA. We can see a very clear trend here. So the US has seen this, US-led imperialism has seen the ALBA as one of the most significant threats to imperialism in the region and to US economic hegemony. And then, of course, we all know, I don't need to speak about, I mentioned the 2002 coup that was backed by the George Bush administration. And then, of course, in 2019, the coup attempt with Juan Guaido that the US government played a key role in. We all know about this. There has been a lot of attention to Venezuela's oil, and it certainly is true. I'm not saying this is not a factor. Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves. And Trump himself said in a Republican Party rally in 2023, when I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil, would have been right next door. This quote got some attention, especially the oil element. But in reality, I think actually what he said is even crazier than we're going to take Venezuela's oil. He said, we would have taken over Venezuela. He didn't say we'll take over the oil. He said we would have taken over the country. And this, of course, has continued under the Democrats, under Biden. It started under Obama. This is very much bipartisan. And there has been attention to comments made by, for instance, Laura Richardson, the commander of U.S. Southern Command under Biden. She said in 2023, she talked about all of the lithium and the lithium triangle of Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. the world's largest oil reserves, not only in Venezuela, but also Guyana, which is increasingly becoming a kind of U.S. protectorate. The U.S. is using Guyana to try to destabilize Venezuela. There are reports that it's going to build a military base in Guyana. There's attempting to seize Venezuelan territory. She mentioned Venezuela's resources, oil, copper, gold. She mentioned that China imports a lot of food from the region, the Amazon, of course, fresh water, which with climate change is becoming more and more important. But I think it's very simplistic to say simply that the U.S. is desperate to overthrow Venezuela's government because of oil, because of resources. It is a factor. I'm not disputing that. John Bolton, the national security advisor under Trump, acknowledged that U.S. oil companies wanted to get access to Venezuelan oil after Chavez had kicked them out and nationalized the oil industry. It's certainly a factor. But of course, the U.S. is also the world's largest oil producer. The U.S. doesn't need Venezuela's oil. U.S. companies would like it. The U.S. would like to get access to other resources in Venezuela. But in reality, I think, the main driving factor is fundamentally, it is political. Of course, economics and politics are inextricably tied. There's no difference between them. But in the sense that Venezuela has been, as I've been talking about here for this presentation, it has been at the vanguard of challenging U.S.-led imperialism and creating a new multipolar order. And John Bolton himself acknowledged this. Of course, he was Trump's national security advisor. He was the architect of the coup attempt in 2019, which he boasted about in an interview on CNN. And in his memoir, Bolton said that Venezuela is a direct challenge to the colonialist Monroe Doctrine. And he said that we must resurrect the Monroe Doctrine. I put the term return in scare quotes because in reality, the Monroe Doctrine never really went away. It never went away, but in particular, we can see that in the past few years, multiple U.S. government officials have invoked the Monroe Doctrine. And in his memoir, Bolton in particular spoke of Venezuela as a threat to the Monroe Doctrine, in particular because of its relations with Russia, China, and Iran. So I really think it's very important to emphasize not only how much of a visionary Hugo Chavez was, but also how President Maduro has continued Venezuela's multipolar construction and has not only maintained an independent foreign policy, but an activist foreign policy in trying to build a multipolar world that is not simply a dictatorship of US-led imperialism, because that's really, the unipolar era was an international dictatorship led by US imperialism. And the US talks about so-called democracy as if it were a democracy, which it very much is not. But in reality, you cannot talk about democracy when a small handful of imperialist countries that were the colonizing powers that colonized the majority of the world, their goal is to control the entire world, the entire political system, and the entire economy. That is an international dictatorship. And in that sense, Venezuela has been at the vanguard of trying to build an actual international democracy, which we can call multipolarity, from the beginning, before Chavez even came to power. We can see in 1998, through his terms into 2013, Maduro has very much continued with this. And the Bolivarian revolution, I think, represents one of the most important revolutions in modern history, in that it showed that even a relatively small country compared to big powers like China and Russia, even a relatively smaller country like Venezuela, can be at the vanguard of helping to build a true international democratic order. On that note, I'm going to conclude. Thanks a lot.
Cities, you guys know me. I don't sugarcoat things. That is not my personality. So I'll update you as we get closer into all this. All right, let's talk about our topic today. And if you notice in the title, what did I put in the title? I put U.S. stands no chance in pressuring Iran over BRICS de-dollarization, because that's what's at the heart of it. But if you only know why, it's because Iran recent decision, which just happened on July 14th. That was just like a week and a half ago or so. And this is what I'm going to be detailing with you regarding also the new president. His name is Masoud Pezeshkian. He's a heart surgeon. I'll detail all this with you. He's a moderate, and will just provide you my own analysis, and I'll answer some questions for you. So if you will be kind, just prepare some questions for later on. So, well, let's start with the key questions, like we always do. You guys know how we do things here on this channel here. So here are the key questions that I thought of, and there are other questions, of course, but this is just what we're gonna be sort of centering the conversation around. So why is the U.S. obsessed? And I use the term very carefully here. Why is the U.S. obsessed with Iran? This is a question for you as well, guys, because you need to think about it. Just now you've been around long enough to, I'm sure you know the history of the U.S.-Iran relations, but you start to think, why is the U.S. obsessed with Iran? Some have always say it's the same sentiment the U.S. has towards China. Would you agree? Second question, does Iran hold the strategic key in West Asia? In other words, does Iran hold the key to reshaping the strategic trajectory of West Asia, or Middle East as it is known in the West? Third question, what can Iran bring to the economic and geopolitical table? We're not talking about just the region, we're talking about the globe. Because remember, you don't dismiss Iran for being one, an OPEC member, two, large population in the region, and third, plays a major role militarily. And the last question is, what about the JCPOA? This is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. This has to do with the nuclear file for Iran, which I will tackle about, since I sort of wrote a book about Iran regarding these aspects here, and I detailed so much. I will share with you one excerpt from it pertaining to our conversation today. So, and this is what we're going to be tackling. So the analysis in itself, the one I'm going to be providing you, it covers both aspects of it. Of course, what I read in certain articles from around the world, not just in the US, which I will provide you the links, but also regarding my own research that I've conducted a few years ago, by which when I wrote my book, I was thinking long term. And now I'm seeing certain events happening as I predicted back then. So here is what happened with the new president. By the way, I have a lot of pictures. I got a lot of pictures here. This is the picture of the president, Masoud. His name is Masoud Pezeshkian. It's a hard last name to pronounce. So now the question becomes is, because he's the new president now, and he's a moderate, he's not a hardliner. You know, he defeated a hardliner who was the commander of the IRGC. It won't matter, and I'm not going to tackle that kind of stuff. I'm going to focus on the analysis as to why the U.S., we're going to be seeing the U.S. reaching out to Iran. Mark my word on it. So why? What happened? Iran now renews, listen carefully, its diplomatic sort of effort to do what? To ditch the US dollar. And this, not just sort of verbally here, to ditch it from business interactions with its key partners. And this encouraging others to do the same, with the aim of what? Weakening the US standing in global economic calculations. Spot on. Spot on. This is why I use the term pressure. You know, it's not about the BRICS. Iran is already in BRICS. It was admitted on January 1st of this year. You know, maybe I made a mistake by not clarifying, and I added one word in the title that makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's not about, well, the US doesn't want Iran to join BRICS. No. Iran is already there. So Because here is the thing, where the challenge of where the U.S. concerned about, and is seeing an opportunity. Yeah, the U.S. is seeing an opportunity to sort of, let me remove these questions here. So, an opportunity so they can like exert more pressure. Because here is the thing, what happens, which a lot of people do not know. I was privy to it back in my days in Washington. There is an office in Switzerland, okay? That one that handles the communications between Tehran and Washington. Okay? Yes, there is a communication. Yeah, there is no diplomatic representation after 1979, of course. But the communication is going on. And this is what the US is betting on. Except where the problem for the US is not coming at it with an equal footing. We coming at it with this attitude of we are the top, we are better. It doesn't work anymore. It's the same arguments it's the same mistake we make when we meet with the Chinese. As a matter of fact, the Secretary of State, the incompetent Tony Blinken, he's going to be meeting with Mr. Wang Yi in Laos. And I am just wondering, I'm going to cover this for you. I am just wondering the attitude of Tony Blinken now is going to be approaching this. But he's realizing you can't do that with the Chinese anymore. It's the same argument I make about Iran and US relations. And this is why we're going to be trying to play somewhere by trying to exert pressure on Iran, especially regarding the JCPOA, or the nuclear program. Because remember, Iran now got a new president. He's a moderate. So the moment Washington found out who the next president in Iran, which is moderate, right there they start to think about, oh, this is someone we can talk to, or this is someone we can pressure, which I don't think so. It's a mistake anyway. But this is what's at the sort of how it's going to move forward. So, but before I do this, let me do a little bit of geography, and I'm going to do history because there is one aspect of history that I need you to understand. So let me share the map with you here. It is Iran. And briefly, and I'm not going to go too much, it just suffice it to say that Iran is mountainous area. I was closer from the Iraq side in Kurdistan. I could see over the horizon the Iranian mountains, and it's a rugged terrain. So it's a mountainous country in Western Asia. Iran is situated both in the northern and eastern hemisphere of the earth, and it is bordered by Armenia and Azerbaijan to the northwest, Turkmenistan in the northeast, Afghanistan and Pakistan in the east, Iraq and Turkey in the west. So Iran is also bounded by the Caspian Sea in the north and by the Persian Gulf and Gulf of Oman in the south. This is why it's very, very important for you guys to understand just part of a little bit of geography. But the history is the key to all this one here. And what I'm going to do is I'll share with you a brief excerpt from what I wrote in my book about, what is it? Right here, when I wrote it. And by the way, I am talking to the publisher, detailing the ins and outs of the legal aspects of the contract, because after that, I'm going to upload it for you guys for a purchase, because I have to put it on the platform and I have to pay certain aspects of it. But I won't ask for what they are. They're asking for like, what, $90 for it. Yeah, it's heavy academic stuff, but no, I ain't gonna be charging that. So anyway, this is what's important to understand. And like I argued in the book, it will be a daunting, I use the term daunting task to cover the 5,000 years of history of the Persian Empire in few pages. There is no way. Same argument I made regarding about China. You can't cover 5,000 in few pages. So, however, one must explain, put in perspective, and illuminate the crucial elements that have shaped modern day Iran, given the events of the past millennia, because it's very important. And like I argued, it will not do the reader justice if I focus the narrative only on specific period or over another in its history. Why? Because we're gonna have we'll be missing. The need to emphasize the historical record of the Persian Empire could not be greater, of course. And that was one of the case that I made. So suffice it to say that if we are to look at the history of Iran, we're going to have to divide it into three phases. Phase one is the prehistoric period, which began with the earliest evidence of humans on the Iranian plateau. This goes back about 100,000 BC. And the end of it roughly at the start of the first millennium BC. The second phase starts in the proto-historic period. That one covers approximately the first half of the first millennia BC. And the third period is the Achaemenid dynasty, which was in the 6th and 4th century BC. Those are very, very important. And this is when, right in this time, the 6th and the 4th century, when Iran entered the full light of written history, because that's what it was not disclosed back then. What I'm going to be sharing with you later on, a link to an article from a historical record that I found, and it was written by Sarah Roller, because that's the author of this, and I'm going to share it with you. I read it in its entirety. It's you know, spot on, because I wrote the book about Iran, so I had to check that record, and it sort of what's the word? It confirms whatever I researched before versus what Sarah wrote. So here's the first thing I'm going to share with you, and I have some pictures from the archives right here. You look at this one here, this picture. Now, what you're looking at? You're looking at a map of 1636. This is the Kingdom of Persia. So what's important is that the region that is now known as the country of Iran has been known by many different names. A lot of people in the West do not understand, and had sort of different boundaries and borders over the past 5,000 years. So the name of Iran itself comes from the Avestan word Eryanam. I repeat, Eryanam. That's the original word. And when is this came from? It came from during the time of Cyrus the Great in the 4th century. That's how the origin of it. So you ask yourself the question, and Sarah did a good job on this one by explaining what that is. So what is Persia? Well, Persia was first coined by, and I'm going to ask you. Let me ask you, who coined this term, in your opinion? You know, which civilization used the term Persia? Let me just, because I like you to be part of the conversation here, guys. Yeah, and some of you might know. Oh, I already see. Oh, you got it. Muslim Revert. Michael Christo, you got it. Stephen Gronville, you got it. It was the Greeks. You're absolutely correct. It was the Greeks as a term. So they used Persia as a term to refer to Cyrus the Great. And we do have, by the way, an avid supporter of the channel by the name of Cyrus. So Cyrus the Great's empire. And what happened back then is stemmed from the word Parsa. So the term that's been used later was Persia, but the original term is Parsa, P-A-R-S-A. So, and that was the name of a group of people from which Cyrus the Great emerged to rule. This is what's important. So as a result, the word Persia is an exonym, a name that is given to a group of people by an outside force. This we call it an exoname. It's when we refer to a group, someone from outside that region give a name to a group. That's what it means. So Greek legend associated the name Persia with Perseus, P-A-R-S-E-U-S, giving him a fictional son, Perseus, from whom the Persian people stemmed. I have another picture here that I need to show you here, because it's very important. I looked into this and I said, okay, that's my, the community needs to know. Yes, you do. because it will make perfect sense to you guys. So, then where the name of Iran came from and why it emerged? Well, the name of Iran had long been used dating back to the Zoroastrian, which was in 1000 BC, along with other variation on the name, including Arya, A-R-Y-A, which is literally means the land of Aryans. Certainly by the 4th century AD, the term Iran was being used in writing and literature. And some Western texts noted, I didn't get to Shah yet, some Western texts noted an internal preference of the name Iran by the 19th century. This is why when I wrote my book about Iran, I went back to 18th century from there forward. I didn't go all the way before that. So you fast forward to 1930, and that's when steps began to be taken by none other than Reza Shah, this guy here on the picture. Reza Shah to formalize the change in name from Persia to Iran. And the request came into force in March 1935. Of course, what happened during that time? The British requested to continue to use Persia, as Iran was too similar to Iraq. Both countries, meaning Iraq and Iran, were involved in the Second World War and occupied by British, and Churchill cited worries that the similarity in name will be confusing. In 1959, Reza Shah's son announced that the term Iran and Persia could be used interchangeably in formal correspondence. So despite this, Iran has become the country's dominant name, its official name since 1979, which translates to the Islamic Republic of Iran. Fast forward to the 20th century. So 20th century, what happened in 20th century? Oil was discovered in Persia in the early 20th century. And sort of, because Iran has a very vast land mass and had long been complicated relationship with its neighbors. So these developments, the discovery of oil, changed the political and economic landscape of the whole region forever. And the same thing happened with the Saudis when the oil was discovered. So the rest of the world paid now Persia new attention, or Iran new attention, and especially the Brits were the first to capitalize on the discovery, setting up the Anglo-Persian Oil Company in 1909, which took total control of Iran oil industry. Iran oil and petroleum industry have remained where it is. It was still, I have a picture here that I need to share with you because you need to see this one. Hold on, let me wait till I get to it. I want to get ahead of myself here. Now, the idea of where, what was I saying? In 1930, so Iran wanted to get too involved, Britain rather, get too involved into all this. And the reason being because they wanted to take over the oil fields. This is exactly why Iran ended up pushing against the presence of the Brits. And this can be evidenced by this picture right here. Very, very interesting understanding of this particular aspects of it. Now, when you look at this, you're going to have to think in terms of, this is from, by the way, another article that I came across, and it was, and I digged into the history here to look into, and I found one that was written by Alex Ward and Zach Bookman, and I will put the link for you guys to understand what this is all about, because you need to understand these aspects of it. Now, with this one here, you're going to have to ask yourself some really sort of key questions. Why there is this animosity between Iran and the United States? So, because if you can understand, and that's exactly the point of the article also made, literally, if you can understand the tensions that exist today between Iran and the US by just looking at the recent event, that's because you have to move back some about 70 years ago to put this in perspective for you. So while you start with, I'll take you back to 1951. What happened in 1951? Dr. Mohammed Mossadegh took over because he was a nationalist, right? He took over and became the prime minister. So Mossadegh strongly opposed foreign involvements in Iran. And this is a reference to Britain, particularly in its oil industry, which had been built significantly part by the British. We gotta emphasize this one here. It wasn't Iran that built the infrastructure for the oil, it was the British. However, what happened right after Mossadegh became prime minister, the parliament in Iran at that time approved a bill to nationalize the British-owned oil company in Iran. And of course, the British were very furious. What they ended up doing, they reached out to the US in support of a coup. They, meaning MI6 and the CIA Central Intelligence Agency, conducted a coup in 1953 to overthrow Mossadegh. So now what came after him? Because what happened after that one, sort of for the next, 20 years, 26 years, this guy came up right there. So for next 26 years, the US supported the armed the Shah, Reza Pahlavi. So now Reza Pahlavi was a very, 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 very brutal dictator. So, and we all know how the history there goes. Suffice it that from that point forward to the this is why he was hosted in the White House by JF Kennedy at the time. And this is Robert McNamara, the former, who had some sort of dark history in Vietnam. And we all know that history, guys, because you can't ignore that one. The same with the late Henry Kissinger, the same with Madeleine Albright, all of them. So, but nonetheless, we're going to focus on this one here right now. So the White House at that time welcomed the Shah because they wanted to ensure. However, 1997, what happened in 1997? Can you guys type in the chat box? What happened in 1997? Dave Gosby, you're right. He was an extreme, vicious puppet of the West. You're absolutely correct. What happened Francis Tango, good to see you. What happened 1979? Okay, I know it takes a while for this to show up. Oh, boycott, you graduated from college. Good for you, man. 1979, John Smith, you got it. Iran Revolution, because that's exactly what happened. And because Iranian rose up against the Shah regime. So what happened at that time? The United States was widely sort of seen as a complicit, and it was. You know, funny how the record sometimes is said, well, it was just seen or perceived as no. He was a complicit. Let's not manipulate the masses into the wording. Straightforward. He was a complicit in those crimes, as we still do today. So what happened at that time? This is where that chant has now become the slogan when Iran, like that to America and so forth, it became the norm now in their conversation. So the Iran took over, the hardliners took over, and you know the rest of the history as far as the Ayatollah Ali Khomeini. Now there is the current supreme leader Khamenei and the former one Khomeini, two different. It's almost spelled the same. So this is a picture of the the hostage taken. That was the 52 weeks, which, by the way, guys, did you know that the U.S. was talking to Iran behind closed doors about these hostages, and a deal was struck between Reagan and, at that time, with Iran? That's why they were released, because we got a deal with them. And the deal was that Iran will buy weapons. And when the U.S. got the money, where that money went? Does anybody know, guys, if you know the history of that part? Where that money go? Let me just see in the chat box, you know. Yeah. Iran-Contra. That is correct. So which country did it go to? It was one particular country where that money went to. Yeah, yes, you're right, Robert Young. You're right. You guys are right. The Iran-Contra. I'm talking about which country the money went to. It was one specific. Nicaragua. Sam, Karina, you got it. It was Nicaragua to support the Sandinistas against the government, because the government was at that time communist. So because there was support from the Soviet Union back then. So what happened is that the Reagan administration cut a deal behind closed doors. And who took the fall for this? At that time, Colonel Oliver North is known as Ollie here in the United States. So my point in highlighting this to you is to show you that despite what you hear, whatever, there are talks behind the scenes. It was just a phone call last week. I'm going to tell you this, a phone call last week between the Russian defense minister and the US defense minister. They just talked, by which the Russian warned the United States. So my point, always remember, the media will have to say something else, but there is a reality taking place behind closed doors. So fast forward, the Iran Revolution took place 1979, and right after that one, we imposed sanctions that still hold till today, almost for the last 38 to 40 years. That's how long the sanction have been, and still. Of course, we pushed the conflict between Iran and Iraq. It was us who created that in the 80s intentionally, because we wanted to have the tensions to maintain our dominance in the region. And it was till this era of the Obama time, that's when the deal was struck with the Iranians regarding the P5+1. It wasn't just the US. There was the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany. That's what the deal was with Iran regarding the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. Of course, right, and I'm not going to detail too much on these guys because it's going to take so much time. Suffice it to say that the deal was working. Yeah, there are those who say, well, there was a flaws with the JCPOA, but it was working. It was till Trump in 2018 yanked the U.S. out of it unilaterally, breaching all the norms of a contract. You can't do that. So just because we felt, oh, we are the U.S., we can do it. No, you have no right whatsoever to just behave like that on the international stage. And at the same time, you're saying we uphold the law. We defend the human rights. We do this, we do that. You're saying one thing and doing the opposite. You know, what kind of credibility that would leaves you with? So, and this at the same time, because I was very, very, very familiar with the JCPOA, because I wrote the book about it. You have to immerse into it. So there were certain aspects of it, they weren't 100% good, but overall, the agreement really put the limits on Iran to progress in its nuclear program for a few years down the road. Now it's too late for that. It is too late because the Iran will not trust the Americans. Why should no country will trust the Americans for that matter? So, and this is during the conversation that the U.S. and the international community essentially sort of agreed with Iran regarding everything was working fine. So, because here's the thing, the deal itself, the JCPOA agreement, was doing what it's supposed to do. Even the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which, by the way, you don't trust its report. I'm telling you here based on facts. You can't trust the IAEA. You know, even back then, he repeatedly confirmed that Iran was complying with all the obligations under the agreement. So, all of a sudden, the former President Trump yanked the US out of it, which wasn't Trump. He was pressured to do so. This is why, to give you an idea, that is not the President of the United States that manages the stuff. So, and that's why for Trump, it was a disaster, and now he's coming back to power. I've always said, and I don't shy away from saying it, Trump, he was never qualified for president. We don't have any leaders. We have the incompetent people. They're not fit for that position, including the current one. You know, we don't have any. We don't have any. So, well, of course, for the history moves forward because Trump embarked on some policies, including this one here. Who's this guy here? Do you guys know who that is? Can anybody type in the chat box, please? Because it was Trump that made that decision. Of course, 2018, when he made the decision to pull the US out of the Iran nuclear deal. And basically what he said, and I quote, "We cannot prevent an Iranian bomb under the decaying and rotten structure of the current agreement." End of quote. No. You were pressured to do so. So the question becomes, let me see in the chat box what you guys wrote down. Oh, you guys got it. Hamad Sidi, you got it. OG Moses, you got it. Soleimani. Ivana, Solomon or Soleimani. Yeah, Davo, you guys got it. You guys got it. So the question becomes is why? You know, what purpose will it serve? And it was a debate, believe it or not, as to those who were in support of that and those who were against of that one. And I'm not going to get too much into this. Suffice it to say that it was, to me, in my opinion, as one who's been around in that part of the world and whatever, it was useless. It didn't serve the U.S. anything. You know, Iran's structure is very, very deep. They have successions in lines. They have, you know, you take out one, it will be replaced by another competent general and so forth. Now, you give credit to Suleiman because he was beloved by his people, but he was also very shrewd when it comes down to the strategy in the region regarding the support for the groups that are financed and supported by Iran. So they were under under Suleiman. So this is why it was that debate about whether taking him out was a good idea. So, and there are those who are for and those who are against. And I'm not going to detail into all this. I will provide you the link, guys, and you can read up on it later on. So now let us get into my own analysis about where I see this is moving forward. So, and even as I argued in my Iran book back then, that when you think about geopolitics and you think about the future of West Asia or Middle East at that time, or even the future of international relations, with the U.S. foreign policy towards the region, towards not only the region, but also towards the major powers. What are we referring to? We're referring to Iran, to Russia and China. So, because to me, the argument that I made at that time was a nuclear Iran, okay, in the region, which, by the way, the region in itself is always a dangerous flux and in constant shifting attitudes, because that changes from one day to the next. You look at now what's going on with what the H group in Yemen just did, or the H group in Lebanon is doing to Israel, you kind of just see where the argument. This is why the speech of the Prime Minister of Israel in Congress, into our corrupted Congress, it's a call for pulling the US into a war directly with Iran. He wants us to do the war for him. That's basically what I amount to. And this is why the shifting attitudes and the energies on the global stage sort of, in my opinion, and as I argued back then, it will introduce new, really new shifts within the geopolitical landscape, and of course make international relations more tense among major powers. That's what I argued back then and still holds today. And even back then, and I used the word for word as I wrote it, these results will affect not only the already tense relations among world major powers, mainly China, Russia, and the United States, but also among key regional players in the greater Middle East. Nuclear Iran introduces fundamental changes to a region where ambiguity, chaos, and violence are the order of the day. That's what I argued back then, and we seems to be moving into that direction, except now you have the support now of Russia for a group like the H group, which is going to be providing them some advanced weapons. And I'm going to do an analysis for you about that one soon. So to me, with what's going on right now, why the U.S. is stand no chance, as I mentioned in the title, regarding pressure in Iran, is because conventional wisdom suggests that the new geopolitical landscape in the region now will allow Iran to flex its military, economic muscles, and even ideology to a degree. But they are now working out their they have worked out their differences with the Saudis, thanks to the Chinese, so they don't have to worry about the ideological aspects. So, but of course, that's going to be with the help of two, Russia and China. And given these realities, Iran will be closer than ever to realize its political objective. And what is it? Is to become a regional power. Straightforward. It's not Turkey. It's not Saudi Arabia. So, and against this backdrop, one will argue, as I did at that time, that the United States policy towards the region will have to adapt to these realities. But how can U.S.-American foreign policy adapt when we don't have a cohesive policy, when we have a fractured or fragmented foreign policy strategies, and we don't even have a strategy to begin with? So, because in my opinion, the U.S. policies will be tested like never before as it is today, especially when it comes to what kind of cooperation the United States will undertake with other major powers, China and Russia. Because this new geopolitical environment, which now we are moving into multipolar, will require that. The U.S. has no other options. We can't dictate the terms anymore. That is my point into all this. So now to think about this U.S. pressures on Iran regarding BRICS finances or de-dollarization. So I'm going to tackle my own analysis from two angles. One of them is the financial and the other one from the GCPUA. When you think about the finances aspects of it, so he was the new president who's now going to be pushing for a new direction of the Iran foreign policy. And one of the key that Iran, and this is where, as an analyst, you're going to have to, first of all, listen carefully to what a head of state is saying, assuming he's talking sense. And second, you're going to have to learn how to read between the lines to see where the policy is headed. This is exactly what Iran is doing, quietly, in a subtle way. Just take a listen to me carefully here. Iran advances de-dollarization among BRICS members to counter U.S. dominance. And this, by the way, as I mentioned, just on July 14th, that decision was to move forward, of course, after the elections. And all this because the Iran new foreign policy will be promoting an ambitious, I use the term for that, an ambitious campaign within the alliances of the BRICS to counter U.S. influence over global markets and alleviate the impact of American sanctions on its own economy, meaning Iran in this case. And this is why the head of the parliament, I have a picture of him right here. This is Iran parliament speaker. His name is Mohammed Bakir Kalibaf. That's his name. So what happened with this gentleman here? The speaker was in Russia recently. He visited Russia to attend a major event there. He was in St. Petersburg to attend the 10th parliamentary forum of the BRICS group of nations. You all remember, BRIC announced that they're going to have to establish now a parliament, right? He's a speaker of the parliament. Iran is BRICS member. So he went there. And his argument to the forum right there was the idea of it is now or never for the BRICS members to de-dollarize as a countermeasure against what the US called sort of its pressure on emerging economies, because the US is pressuring emerging economies. It's not pressuring Russia, it's not pressuring China, but it wants to pressure the likes of India, the likes of Iran. This is what I'm referring to here, guys, when I said the US stands no chance in pressuring Iran over BRICS de-dollarization. So the Iranian parliament speaker, he stated that ditching the US dollar will be, the purpose of it will be to neutralize one of the main levers of American influence, end of quote. Spot on. And basically the plan of what the Iranian parliament speaker is advocating for is that the plan to remove US currency from the business ties with partners has increasingly been one of the Iran's foreign policy strategies aimed at mitigating the impact of sanctions. Of course, we've been having sanctions on them for the last 38 years. So, and this is why I wanted to bring this to you, for you to understand. This is not about, well, US wants to prevent Iran from joining BRICS. No, it's too late for that. Iran is already in BRICS. So what the US is going to do now is going to try to influence even countries inside, the likes of India. I just see this coming. I just see this coming. I'm even wondering now about United Arab Emirates, because they are now part of Egypt. You know, I still don't understand BRICS allowing Egypt in. Egypt is under the influence of the US. We give them money. We bribe them that way. So, and this is why I just don't see how, yeah. But for Iran, no. There is no way. Even if we go through the office in Switzerland and have those behind closed doors negotiations, no. You can't trust the Americans anymore. So, and I bet you we're going to be doing that. We're going to reach out to Iran to figure out a deal. We did the same with Venezuela. Just to guys let you know. You all know we have sanctions on Venezuela, right? Well, guess what we did about 4 months ago? We reached out to Venezuela asking them, can you please send us some oil and we will lift some sanctions? No. Doesn't work that way. Venezuela said, no, you keep the sanctions. We don't care. You know, because we are at the end. We have reached the end of our hegemonic dominance in the world. Simple as that. It's a reality. I know some here in the US do not like to hear it, but it's a fact. So, but here is what I found very interesting, what the head of the parliament, the Iranian parliament, said when he was at the summit in St. Petersburg. He said, and I quote, because it's very, very interesting, noted that the Iran advocates multilateralism, and for that reason wants BRICS countries to further enhance their cooperation to reach their lofty goals, including the global governance based on the principle of multilateralism, end of quote. That tells you right there, like I always say, guys, you read between the lines, that tells you right there, the idea, it's already a foregone conclusion as to the shifting of the world from a unipolar to a multipolar. Multilateralism is another word for multipolarity. Now, they are the so-called neutral countries, which I don't buy that argument. Because you look at Switzerland. Is Switzerland neutral? Here's a question for you guys. Yes or no? Please answer in the chat box. In your opinion, do you believe Switzerland is a neutral country? Let me just see your response, because I'm very curious, especially for my viewers in Europe. You live there. Oh, Army with Harmony, you say no. Davo, no. Cyborg Ninja, no, it's a hideout. Johnny, Johnny D, not anymore. Bobo Flavor, no. Sarah Carroll, no. You guys get the idea. It's not. It's not. So when, for example, you think of a country like even New Zealand now, and I've been putting a question mark on that country. I never wanted to jump to conclusions because I was always saying to myself, just take it easy. Before we reach a conclusion, let me just see how this next government is going to do. And I followed when, what's her name? The incompetent, what's her name? Arden, which is, by the way, it's a servant of the WEF. You know, she's incompetent. She needs to be in jail for what she did to New Zealanders, as far as you all remember the policies she embarked on back then. Then I was always saying, and right there I start to see the signs. Is New Zealand going some other directions? I said, no, let me hold my conclusion till I see what the next administration does. The next one came in, and I start to see the talks, how they are now expanding with the US regarding some stuff. Then I said, I'm still gonna wait. I'm not gonna reach a conclusion yet. You know, as an analyst, you can't just jump to conclusions right away, and you can react emotionally. And when Mahuta, you all remember her, right? What did she tell? What did she say to Tony Blinken to his face? Not ever, not on my watch, because he wanted to pull her into AUKUS. And she said no. And even with that, I said to myself, will this hold? Because she was in a position that there's an upcoming elections. And right there, I'm glad I didn't say anything, because by the time the next person came to power, reversed the policy. It's the same argument I am making here about the countries that they will be in BRICS, and now they are, you can't just invite whomever. You have to have some selection criteria. You can. Is this why, for example, and I am wondering why Indonesia and Singapore pulled out of BRICS altogether? I'm sure it's not about this, about something else. And maybe that's something, maybe one day I might do a conversation or a live stream for you about this particular thing. And what the head of the parliament said, that's Kalibaf, the Iranian speaker, said that BRICS members can play a key role to counter unilateralism and find ways to facilitate trade. End of quote. That's his quote. So, and it makes perfect sense. This is why you're going to be noticing US pressures from behind the scenes. It's not going to work, not because they can convince Iranians, but because of, hypothetically, if Trump wins the elections, even though a recent poll yesterday shows that 60% in the US will vote for Kamala Harris, not Trump. And by the way, I'm not included in that because I don't intend to vote. I'll say straightforward. Who are you going to vote for? You know, I can't advocate for incompetent leaders. I can't vote for that. And second, what most Americans do not. If you are an American, I'm sure you're aware, but I hope some will see this video and realize we don't vote for the president. It's the Electoral College that does that. Where is the heck is this democracy? One man, one vote. Why Electoral College will decide for me? So you got the idea. Now, the second part of the analysis that I wanted to share with you about why the US will try to exert pressure on Iran, it has to do with the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. So, and this is where that idea of when this new president of Iran, let me pull up his picture again. And by the way, there was some calls back then when Trump did what he did, that in New York City. This is in Times Square. That's what it was. So when I'm looking at his picture right here. And by the way, I give credit to this picture to Majid Asgharipour from West Asia News Agency. That's where the credit go to. So basically, when you think about what the President Pezeshkian said back then, because he's a moderate, you know, he's kind of not a hardliner. But he did criticize Europe at that time and the US. Yeah, criticized them for regarding the GCPOA, the handling of it. So, and of course, he didn't mince word regarding the bombardments of Israel of Gaza, or the bombardments by Israel of Gaza. So, because one of the statements that this new president, he said, Masoud, he said that that his country stands firm with supporting Palestinians. So, and of course, that was very embarrassing yesterday or the day before for Congress to open the door to a foreign minister. So it's yeah, I didn't listen to it. I would not be interested in something like this because I know what it's going to be on, and it just
The Northern Army aviation crews of MIL Mi-28NM reconnaissance and attack helicopter began to move, and this time destroyed Ukrainian fortifications and personnel in the area of responsibility of the Sever Group of Forces of the North Group in Kharkiv. A segment video of the Russian Defense Ministry, released on July 27, 2024, shows the latest Mi-28NM helicopter with an asymmetric payload, including 4 VKHR-1 ATGM and AB-8V-20A rocket pod under the right stub wing, and AB-13L1 rocket pod and an external fuel tank under the port stub wing. For some time, it was rare to see such active participation of the helicopter as in the first months of the fighting. But in the past week, Mi-28NM has become a nightmare for the armed forces of Ukraine, especially in the direction. In this video, the crew of Mi-28NM helicopter first fires the unguided rocket 122mm S-13 Tulumbas at the Ukrainian troops' fortifications in pitching mode, after which the VKHR-1 anti-aircraft missile is deployed. No weapon can win a war alone, but Mi-28NM with VKHR ATGM missile with a range of more than 11 kilometers was a terrible thing for the Kiev servicemen to face. The tank tactical missile was controlled by a semi-automatic laser beam channel according to data from the OPS-28M multispectral optical electronic sighting system, capable of classifying tank-type targets at night at a distance of about 7 kilometers. The objective control recording confirmed the target engagement, and the mission was completed. Mi-28NM flight crew, as part of the combat mission, returned to the base safely.
Friends, nobody's talking about this, but the Russian army just launched a major offensive all along the Luhansk front. But simply, the latest Russian breakthrough could become extremely critical for Ukraine. Now the Russians are dangerously approaching the strategic city of Kupiansk. And if nothing is done, Ukrainian forces positioned on the east bank of the Oskol River could get cut off and encircled. One more thrust, and it's GG, well played.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Here you witness Russian infantrymen advancing with determined resolve, pressing the attack on the enemy strongholds with relentless force. Outmanned and outgunned, the local Ukrainian territorial defense unit guarding the sector could not do much to stop them. It's so bad that even the elite Ukrainian brigade Azov explained the situation as one of the most intense areas of the enemy's offensive. At this moment, the Ukrainian command is trying to scramble as many reinforcements as possible to plug the gap. Throughout July, Russian mechanized units surge on countless villages in Luhansk like Stelmachivka, Makivka, Andrivka, Sinkivka, Stepova Novoselivka, and a couple days ago, the first Russian tank army launched a direct spearhead and captured the village of Pischane. They broke through and now relentlessly penetrate deeper and deeper into Ukrainian rears. Mr. President, we got screwed real bad here, and here. In other words, the collapse of these Ukrainian positions could mark the final chapter of the Luhansk front, and thus the beginning of the second battle of Kupiansk. Mainstream media, Russia may be running out of tanks. Reality. Ukraine's commander-in-chief admits since 2022, the number of Russian tanks has doubled. What I find funny is how Forbes openly mocked the capabilities of this Russian armored grouping operating on the Luhansk front. They reported Russia's first tank army has won its first battle in 2 years by advancing a mile and capturing a half-dozen buildings. They completely downplayed the threat posed by all these armored and motorized regiments. And now this first tank army is charging straight for the gates of Kupiansk. Everyone knows the gray clouds are approaching the strategic city. On the 20th of July, the city's website reported, for the first time, the occupiers dropped a bomb weighing 1,500 kilograms on the center of Kupiansk. It's just a matter of time before Ukrainian troops engage in brutal house-to-house fighting in order to salvage Kupiansk. Yet another urban warfare meat grinder for the Ukrainian army. Without even talking about logistics problems the Ukrainian army will soon face, since all the bridges over the Oskol River constantly get bombarded by Russian aviation. Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian War. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads, so make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. Before going all in, we have to start with some foreplay. Since the summer of 2023, we talked many times about the Luhansk front and the countless Russian operations meant to break through towards the Oskol River. The Russian army tried again and again. That was the front on May 1st, 2023, and that was the front line on June 1st, 2024.
Not great or terrible.
We also talked about the possibility of a Russian offensive towards Liman, which would open the road towards Slavyansk. But due to the strategic nature of this town, the Ukrainian command extremely fortified this region and sent numerous reinforcements to counterattack any Russian gains, such as shock units of the elite 3rd Assault Brigade Azov in Terny. However, as you know, Russians, Ukrainians, they're very stubborn. If something doesn't work 8 times, what do? That's right, they try 9 times. Mid-June 2024, the party ends as Ukrainian intelligence officers spotted a significant concentration of enemy forces around Svatove. Enemy columns kept converging towards the city, and the Ukrainians noticed an increased activity in this sector, with the Russian forces conducting more and more probing attacks to find weak points and gaps between Ukrainian trench bastions. Pro-Ukrainian deep state UA even admitted the level of military management of the Russians has somewhat increased. In the end, they assessed that the Russian 20th Army gathered 10,000 soldiers from the 3rd and 144th Divisions, plus 450 armored vehicles and artillery pieces as strike fists for a major offensive. Ukrainian commanders understood that all this fisting could get uncomfortable real quick. And to add to this, on the 18th of June, the 3rd Assault Brigade Azov wrote the following on their telegram. The enemy is intensifying attacks to reach the borders of the Luhansk region. Because of this factual statement, Azov has been heavily criticized by countless Ukrainian journalists. And guess what? They were right. This is exactly what happened. Almost. The Ukrainian command waited and waited for this much anticipated Russian offensive towards Borova. And all of a sudden, on the 30th of June, the front flared up. A larger Russian mechanized formation charged and reached the outskirts of Stelmachivka. However, as you can see in these images, the Ukrainians were ready and the Russians met a storm of steel. Here you can even see some damaged vehicles in the open.
Our men flee the battlefield!
The Ukrainian command popped champagne thinking it was mission accomplished. When on the 6th of July, out of nowhere, Russian assault detachments stormed Pischane and advanced almost 4 kilometers within a day. They completely shoved away the Ukrainian 103rd Territorial Defense Brigade holding the sector and at once controlled the southern part of the settlement. At that point, I think the Russian command faced 3 options. Number 2, attack right in the center and cross 4 kilometers in open terrain using their armored vehicles towards Pischane. Or option 3, advance across these 2 fields and storm Berestove. You see, the Russian command tricked the Ukrainians by carrying recon missions all along this front, making it super obvious, only to pull in Uno and attack 15 kilometers to the north. Diversion, main attack, once again, the masters of Maskirovka. Again! As a reminder, in late May, the Russians had already taken control of Berestove. To be honest, I felt that the Russians would do something in this sector, but I thought they would attack northwards to cut off these Ukrainian forces. But perhaps that was also the most obvious move. So by the 6th of July, they now control the southern half of Pischane. We can even get a glimpse as to how the Russians launched this surprise attack from a tactical level. The assault was swift and extremely coordinated. Unlike what some people tell you regarding meat wave attacks, it was even preceded by demining engineering equipment like this 40-ton BAT vehicle. In this Ukrainian drone footage, we see 5 Russian armored vehicles, which then take a sharp left turn. Then we see them drive right along this tree line. Now you see the field in the back to their left. It's purple. Now because of that, we know where this mechanized column attacked from. They probably departed from Krochmalne along this tree line, took a left turn, and then pushed inside this gap in the tree line. After that, they drove along this tree line towards Pischane, with the purple fields to their left. In the next frame, right at this spot, we see what seems to be 4 Russian armored vehicles destroyed or abandoned. But the video is also a bit misleading because it stops right there. We don't know if some of these BMPs actually returned to the rear. On top of that, since we see Ukrainian mortars firing straight into the tree line, we can guess all the infantry component of this mechanized column actually managed to disembark and probably continue the assault by foot right along this tree line towards the village. Due to the urgent situation, I think the Ukrainians dispatched any available reserve units to counterattack and regain the lost ground. The reason I believe this is because we have evidence in the form of casualty reports of a variety of Ukrainian units that intervened to stop the Russian breakthrough. On the 6th of July, a company commander of the 116th Mechanized Brigade, Senior Lieutenant Pavel Klepak, was reported as KIA. 10 days later, on the 17th of July, Major Leonid Kuzmenko, the commander of the 115th Battalion of the 110th Territorial Brigade, was KIA near Pischane. Despite this battle of attrition, perhaps the Ukrainians believed that this positional fighting would stabilize the sector, just like it did many times in the past. The front did not move for the next 2 weeks, but this allowed the 1st Tank Army to muster its reinforcements and converge more and more assault detachments towards Pischane. It's also important to understand that the Russian command did not necessarily know exactly where the enemy front would break. They would send these probing attacks left and right to see where it cracks, all the while keeping the reserves at the rear. But once there is a gap, they go all in. On July 20th, Russian units advanced 700 meters inside the settlement. 2 days later, they pushed another 600 meters eastwards along the main road. By the 23rd of July, Ukraine had lost control of most of Piszczane. That's when the remaining defenders said, "GG, well played, time to get out." And the entire village fell into Russian hands. The seizure of the village was credited to the 15th Motorized Rifle Regiment, whose soldiers raised the Russian flag on the very symbolic World War II memorial dedicated to the fallen Soviet soldiers. As usual, they also raised the Red Banner. As a historical reminder, during World War II, the 1st Tank Army defended the northern sector at Kursk, pushed across Ukraine until reaching the Vistula River, and took part in the final assault on Berlin. Now, according to the latest news, 4 elements of the 1st Tank Army spearheaded this offensive towards the Oskol River and are now only 6 kilometers away from reaching their objective. If spearhead detachments can continue the attack all the way up until Kolesnivka, they will have effectively cut off the Ukrainian front in two, with the Kupiansk grouping in the north and the Liman grouping in the south, whose troops will hardly be able to mutually support each other. All this would be very similar as to what the Russian armed forces went through in Kherson in the fall of 2022. And we know what happened next. Now, from a political perspective, the Russian military almost conquered the entire territorial boundaries of the Luhansk Oblast, one of the 2 regions of the rebel provinces of Donbass, meaning it will be the first oblast of the annexed regions to be fully under Russian control. On July 20th, the Russian grouping along the Luhansk front launched another attack vector further to the south, this time towards Andrivka. You might ask, why towards this random village? Because if we look at it on a 3D map, we see that this place offers a bridge and a smooth crossing across the Zherebiets River. If the Russians manage to secure this crossing, this is going to be yet another bridgehead from where the Russians could launch a new offensive or plan their next moves. However, before the 1st Tank Army will be able to charge towards the river, it will be imperative to secure the flanks and deal with enemy positions north and south of the salient. Otherwise, the Ukrainians could counterattack and encircle countless Russian units, just like the Germans did so often to the Soviets on the Eastern Front. And according to the latest news on the 26th of July, Russian solid detachments expanded the girth of the area of control with an attack north of Piszczane by advancing another 2 kilometers.
Another fuck up. Another fuck up.
In a way, the successful push towards Piszczane was partly due to the fact that Ukraine's best brigades were pinned down to the north to counter Russian moves against the settlement of Sinkivka. Equally as strategic in the sector is the village of Sinkivka. So let's start with the biggest threat for Ukraine, the Battle of Sinkivka. As you can see on the map, the village is located 6 kilometers northeast of Kupiansk. Sinkivka. As you've seen, I covered this settlement many times. This goes to show how strategic this position actually is. Yet the Russian army proved to be utterly incapable of capturing Sinkivka. No jokes, you just have to whisper the word Sinkivka to any Russian general and he will have the worst nightmares. It got so bad that in the winter, the Russian headquarters even fired the 2 commanders-in-chief in charge of the battle for their incompetence. And now the Russians decided to just bypass the village altogether. One way would be to push to the west. The problem for the attacking force is this massive forested area, since it cancels Russian firepower and the benefits of mechanized units. Option 2 is to attack on the eastern side of Sinkivka, but the Russians already attacked there many times and each time got a bloody nose. Eventually, the Russians broke the deadlock on the 22nd of June when they stormed and captured these 2 tree lines. This one 500 meters long and this one 800 meters long. 2 weeks later, by the 7th of July, they had cleared this tree line, stormed this other one, and in the end secured this 1 square kilometer potato field.
A great success!
But unlike in the past, they managed to keep momentum going. 2 days later, on July 9th, Russian artillery managed to take out key Ukrainian mortar positions, which allowed the infantry to attack along this entire 1 kilometer long tree line just east of Sinkivka. Overall, all along this sector, the Ukrainians have lost the bulk of the tree lines on this first line of defense. Of course, the Ukrainians mustered their reserves concentrated in Petropavlivka, but some of them seem to have been halted, like this T-72M1 that was destroyed by an FPV drone near this Petropavlivka. Russian artillery also zeroed in on this town on the outskirts of Kupiansk and hammered any building that was thought of sheltering troops or storing ammunition. With that being said, it's just a matter of time before Ukrainian forces will have to abandon these two sectors. As they're completely surrounded, they will have no other choice but to fall back to the second line of defense, which is already supported by a third line of defense 1 kilometer to the rear along this other tree line. Yet Sinkivka remains the stone in the shoe. Now, to hasten the fall of the city, the Russian artillery bombarded over and over the settlement of Sinkivka. In this video, we even see Ukrainians running away from this building in ruins towards some bastion and entrenched positions. Meanwhile, around Liman Pershi, in this forested area I mentioned earlier, both sides simply exchange artillery fire. Here it's the Ukrainians that bombarded the Russians, and in this one the Russian 1486 Motor Rifle Regiment launched a Grad rocket barrage on the enemy. What's interesting is around the same day, the 1486 Motor Rifle Regiment was awarded by presidential decree the honorary title Guards for Mass Courage and Heroism. As a reminder, this regiment is the one that stopped the Ukrainian counterattack in Bakhmut in May 2023. I believe it's also noteworthy to mention that on the 18th of July, Russian forces managed to advance 500 meters south of Stepova Novoselivka, inching their way towards this settlement. Although it might not sound impressive, Al Pacino explained it best.
The inches we need are everywhere around us. We claw with our fingernails for that inch.
A couple days later, on the 23rd of July, a Ukrainian M113 APC was destroyed right here on the map, thus hindering Ukrainian rotations around the settlement. I also feel the Russians could launch an attack from the north along this 1.5 kilometer long tree line, which will help them encircle the settlement and force its defenders out. So, let's summarize. Airstrikes on critical bridges over the Oskol River, spearhead towards Pischane, flanking maneuver of Sinkivka, probing attacks near Andrivka, and as part of this major offensive, the Russians now even attacked Makivka. However, in my opinion, the most lethal Russian attack would be against Makivka, but the Russians could flank enemy positions from Novovodyane towards Petrivske. It seems the Russians are trying to storm this hilltop on the west bank of the Zherebiets River, which would allow them to flank the village of Makivka from the north. At the end of June, the Russian command also decided to activate the southern part of the Luhansk front. Truth be told, the attack towards Liman had failed, the attack towards Terny had also failed, so it was time to bypass these positions altogether. On the 28th of June, Russian assault detachments advanced on a 6-kilometer front with a maximum depth of 1,000 meters, literally just the tip. However, this was enough for the Ukrainians to send some of their reserves in that direction. And boom! That's when the Russians pushed towards Makivka with 2 regiments. Now put yourself in the shoes of the Ukraine command. You don't know which attack is a diversion, a feint, or the main assault. So your best bet as a Ukraine commander is just to counterattack and eliminate this threat as fast as possible. The assault was so successful that they captured this entire 2.5 kilometer tree line all the way to the Zherebiets River. The next day, they expanded their area of control, and again by the 6th of July. By the footage we got from the Ukrainian side, we see how the Russians attacked using infiltration tactics, with small fire teams of riflemen pushing forward. And because of this video, we also know that this sector was defended by yet another territorial defense brigade, this time the 107th. I mean, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Just like in the other parts of the front, the Ukrainian command started scrambling for reserve units that could counterattack. The International Legion seems to have been one of the first units sent straight into the flames of battle, much like firefighters rushing into a blaze. The battle was fierce. Ukrainian artillery fired cluster munitions round after round at advancing enemy units, who benefited from the cover and camouflage of all these trees. On the 9th of July, Australian volunteer Brock Greenwood lost his life. And a couple days later, one of his comrades as well, a volunteer from Poland, Tomasz Marcin Senkala, born on September 1st, 2001. Same birthday as me. Thomas joined the International Legion of Ukraine in the fall of 2023 and fell on the 13th of July somewhere around Makivka. As of now, at least 7 Australians and 15 Poles have been reported as KIA as part of the International Legion, very far from the hundreds and thousands claimed by the Russian Ministry of Defense. By the 13th of July, forward elements of the Russian army snatched the southern half of Makivka from the International Legion. And we know this because of this footage, where Russian riflemen took position inside this building just to be zeroed in and Control-Alt-deleted by Ukrainian artillery. And the problem I have with Ukrainian videos is that they always show you these videos of them eliminating Russian troops, but they don't say that they actually lost all this territory. The Ukrainian drone operators then added the sentence, "The occupier decided to escape into space, but forgot he is a pig and not a falcon." Very poetic, true Ukrainian poetry. At last, by the 18th of July, the Russian army activated yet another attack vector and pushed 2 kilometers towards Nevsky. This certainly means the Russian army has a plan to push towards the Zherebiets River. From Makivka, they can push south, and another grouping could perhaps push through these forested areas as a stepping stone to take Nevsky. The analysis of the situation on the Luhansk front would not be complete without covering the events taking place in and around the Siversk salient. We talked about the settlement in my last video. On the 19th of July, the village of Razdolivka finally fell into Russian hands. Ukraine's fallback position was this 2.7 kilometer tree line north of the settlement. But it seems it's already GG, well played, as Russian assault detachments are already storming all these Ukrainian positions. We even got this footage from the 23rd of July. Russian armored vehicles pushed into the exposed no man's land, laying in front of them, with demining vehicles ahead of the column. After passing through the minefield, the BMPs dispersed and rained fire on enemy positions at point blank. The Ukrainian defenders must have been horrified as the BMPs closed in. That's when Russian infantrymen took enemy trenches by storm. All this to say that if the Russians captured the town of Siversk, it could break the deadlock on the southern Luhansk front and allow them to attack towards Liman. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to the
The Russian military department has published another footage of the brilliant work of the Iskander missile system and Russian intelligence. It is reported that Russian intelligence has managed to identify the exact location of the command post and the control point of unmanned aerial vehicles of the 63rd Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. As it turned out, this classified military object of the Ukrainian army was located in the northwestern part of the city of Krasny Liman. In the presented footage, you can see how the Russian Iskander ballistic missile strikes an enemy object with surgical precision, in which Ukrainian militants have placed a command post and a control point of FPV drones. As a result of this missile strike, a powerful explosion occurred, followed by the detonation of shells and other weapons systems stored in the building. According to the Russian military department, this missile strike completely disrupted the vital activity of the 63rd Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine in the Krasny Liman direction of the front. Commenting on the successful operation of the Iskander missile system, the Russian military stressed that as a result of this missile attack, about 70 Ukrainian militants, including high-ranking officers, were killed. In addition, the Russian military department confirmed the complete destruction of the command of the 63rd Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, along with 400 FPV drones and 5 armored personnel carriers. My friends, this missile strike has caused significant damage to the Ukrainian army, especially given the fact that the armed forces of Ukraine are experiencing a high shortage of officers and soldiers. In addition, the loss of such a large number of unmanned aerial vehicles also caused significant damage to the armed forces of Ukraine, since drones are the most important and effective means of warfare for Ukrainian militants. At the same time, it is also worth noting that over the past 30 days, the Russian army has been extremely actively and effectively using its Iskander missile systems, destroying enemy targets behind enemy lines. Almost every day, the Russian military department declares the destruction of the military facilities of the Ukrainian army and NATO forces. All this indicates that Russian intelligence greatly strengthened its activities on the territory of Ukraine, identifying even the most classified and well-camouflaged enemy military facilities.
Go figure. Follow me.